Good morning. This is the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission. It is December 2nd, and we have a busy week ahead of us. We will start our week with a roll call.
Commissioner Ackerman,
Here.
Commissioner Cross,
Here.
Commissioner Mesner,
Here.
Commissioner Oath,
Here.
Commissioner Ogletree,
Here.
Commissioner Ray,
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 7 commissioners present.
Welcome. Welcome to all 7 of you. Look forward to a productive day today. We've got a lot on the agenda. Next on the agenda, it's not actually published, but we do a commissioner check-in or commissioner comments. Does anybody have comments for the good of the cause? Commissioner Ogletree.
Thank you, Commissioner Robbins. Just wanted to share that I'm not going to be able to attend. I have a conflict this week, but I know that this, this particular rulemaking is very important. And Nicole Rowan, who leads the Water Quality Control Division, will be sitting in for me. And David Snap from our Hazardous Materials and Waste Management Division will also be attending on my behalf next week.
And next week for the produced water, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And Nicole Rowan is this week for Class 6?
Correct.
All right, great. Well, we look forward to having each of them in your stead. Commissioner Ogletree, thanks for the introduction.
Thank you.
All right. Next on the agenda is a CDPHE greenhouse gas inventory update presentation by Matthew Twyman. Do we have Mr.
I am. Good day, commissioners. Can you all hear me?
Good morning.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good morning to y'all. Let me make sure I share my screen here correctly. Do this quick. How does that look? Does everyone see presentation going?
Yes, we do now.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. Good morning, commissioners. I appreciate you having me this morning. Welcome back from the Thanksgiving holiday. Hope everyone had a good one. As I just said, my name is Matthew Twyman. I'm the supervisor of the Greenhouse Gas Inventory and Reporting Unit over in CDPHE's Air Pollution Control Division's Climate Change Program. Nested within nesting, huh? So I'm here today because I've been asked to offer an update similar to ones I've been giving recently on revisions to our previously published 2023 statewide greenhouse gas inventory. I recently gave a rather extended edition of this to the Air Quality Control Commission, and I'm going to give y'all a little bit more of an abbreviated version here today. But if there are additional things in questions or whatever, I can just as easily swap over to a different presentation if needed. But hopefully I'll be able to answer everyone's questions here. Okay, so there were 3 main updates to the inventory that we recently published. Quick recap, the greenhouse gas inventory is mandated by statute to be published no less frequently than every 2 years. And the cycle has been every odd year. So we published the inventory in December of 2023. Concurrently, we were working with the Energy Office with their development of the second greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap, or what is commonly referred to as Roadmap 2.0. Roadmap 2.0 set all of the policy actions, the near-term policy actions that the state is hoping to achieve over the next 3 or so years in pursuit of achieving the statewide and sector targets that are also established in statute. And those reduction targets, I'll just go over them very quickly, but there's a statewide reduction target relative to a 2005 baseline of a 26% reduction by 2025, a 50% reduction by 2030, and then all the way down to net zero by 2050. And there's also sector-specific targets for oil and gas sector and industrial manufacturing. So our inventory We worked very closely as part of that effort. What my team provides is mostly historical estimates of statewide greenhouse gas emissions. We then work with RMI, previously Rocky Mountain Institute, to develop projected emissions all the way out through 2050. So that work was done, like I said, in coordination with the Energy Office. But as you may or may not know, the pollution reduction roadmap was published then in late February. So we had expected at that time to release an update around March so that we could integrate final revisions that were made to projections for the roadmap process. So that was scheduled, but shortly before then, we identified some issues with our oil and gas emissions inventory tool that we then felt needed to be addressed. So that will represent the majority of what we discuss here today. But there were two other updates that, because we delayed, there was an opportunity to integrate two other things within our inventory that previously were not there. And the first one had to do with integrating crankcase venting, mostly from upstream and midstream large engines. That was an emission source category that hadn't previously been estimated. And really because of emission factors that were released by the EPA and work that was done by the Midstream Steering Committee, which was founded as in development of a midstream combustion rule over in APCD. So we were able to estimate historical emissions for that for the first time, and that got rolled into the work we were doing for projections. And then also there's, during that Roadmap 2.0 development process, concurrently the Energy Office, along with CDOT and a contractor, were developing a land use model that would show how newly adopted or soon to be adopted at that time policies around land use could benefit transportation related emissions and building energy use emissions. And that would really only represent future emissions. So that was work that we were able to roll in with Rocky Mountain Institute as well, or RMI. So then the third thing, like I just said, the largest part of the updates in terms of magnitude and total effort was really an update to how we estimated historical and also future emissions from the oil and gas sector. Excuse me, let me move something out of the way here. Distraction. And so we had previously, the division had developed a tool for estimating these emissions back in 2020. And that tool, it's an Excel-based workbook that was co-developed with help from other agencies and then really vetted with the contractor that was hired for the first the GHG pollution reduction roadmap. And that tool was used for both the first and second roadmap, as well as the 2021 and the 2023 greenhouse gas inventories. And it's essentially a Colorado-specific tool that integrates things like model well facilities, gas compositions that are specific to, say, the DJ and other basins within Colorado. It accounts for flaring and venting, fugitive emissions, and then really the lion's share of emissions fall under what's called what were called leaked emissions. And I know in terms of oil and gas sector, maybe the terms aren't perfectly well defined for our use when we speak of leaked or fugitive emissions. I think broadly speaking, we consider oil and gas to be fugitive emissions. These are process-related emissions, not combustion-related emissions. So just to be very clear, anything that is combustion-related is really under industrial fuel use in terms of our inventory. So the updates that we're talking about today have nothing to do with any estimates for combustion-related emissions. So The majority of the issues came about because of maybe three different issues that we found with calculations. And so to talk about how we found those problems, the workbook had never been shared publicly. And that was really the last piece that we felt needed to be made available in a pursuit of just better transparency for our methods and data sources and estimates in general. And the reason that workbook hadn't previously been shared was because it was rather intense. It was a very big, hard to follow, had a lot of additional things that weren't actually used. And it took our team quite a while to untangle it and to simplify it and to create a new version that we felt was ready to be published to the public. And so just a quick note that the team that I oversee and the climate change program in general is very new. Our program was founded around 2021 with a team of maybe 3.5 people. And then my unit, the inventory and reporting unit specifically, came about only maybe last June. So this was work that was conducted previous to any of us being here. And so we were getting up to speed to understand how this tool was made, how it was used. And it was in the process of trying to translate formulas that were in the workbook scattered everywhere. And there wasn't often consistency. So we had to go through all of that and translate those into handwritten equations that we could then put into a document or into a new workbook to show people just at a high level, this is what's going on, instead of having someone needing to click through all the cells like we had when we were learning things to build an understanding of what's going on. So it was in that process that we found these issues. So let me talk about those issues in particular. The largest impact was really due to estimates of converting gas composition to emissions of CO2 or methane in the upstream and midstream segments. And what's important to note is that this workbook is not terribly granular. It lumped all of upstream and all of midstream emissions. So essentially what it said is anything at or upstream of a gas plant is considered at or upstream is considered upstream and midstream in the contents of this workbook. And what we found is that when you're trying to convert from the gas composition of leaked methane or leaked natural gas to derive the actual mass of CO2 and methane, what the workbook had accidentally done was apply a gas composition factor twice in two separate places. So instead of one single equation, it was really broken out across several, and that factor was applied twice. So that had the effect of artificially deflating our estimates for upstream and midstream emissions to a very large degree. So that resulted in, when we made the correction, it was about a 27 to 29% increase for all of those leaked emissions for upstream and midstream, which was very sizable. The other issues we found were much smaller, but to a similar, the same problem impacted downstream emissions. So the same equations, the same factors being applied twice, but the downstream leaked emissions were already assumed to be much smaller anyways. So the impact was also relatively small, but in the same proportion. The other smaller things that we found had to do with venting and flaring emissions. So what the workbook does is it takes model tanks and then uses APEN data to get the counts of tanks and then apply different factors for how well historical rules have been penetrated within the overall population of tanks to derive then how much is pushed to being vented versus how much was flared. And so again, here there were derivations of emission factors that weren't performed correctly. In particular, the emission factor for CO2 from flaring of flash gas accounted for the burning of hydrocarbons larger than methane, but it missed the CO2 resulting from actually combusting methane. So we made that correction. And then the other pertaining to methane, it was kind of the opposite issue. Here, it accidentally, and it shouldn't have done this in the first place, but it accounted for CO2 released from combusting methane, which is not appropriate when you're talking about uncombusted methane. And so we there also corrected the issue to account for the portion of methane that remains in uncombusted flash gas. So all in all together, those two issues with venting and flaring resulted in about a 9% increase for that category. All in all then, the net impact, let me just bump over here to the next slide then. All in all, the net impact across the oil and gas sector for us was about a 30% across the board increase to historical emissions estimates. And that really ranged from about 6 to 9 million tons, depending on the year and how large it was in the time series. So what you can see here is the blue area is the prior sector total that we had estimated in the December release of the 2023 inventory. And then we stack on top of that the increases for the upstream and midstream segment, the increases to the downstream segment, and then the additional increases to venting and flaring to arrive at our new estimates, which is really this dark red line at the very top. And I just want to point out here real quick that the workbook, like I said, it's somewhat crude and we're looking to make advancements upon that. But importantly, it has a couple of very significant controlling factors that have to do with rule penetration and also with assumed leak rates throughout the time series. Those two are essentially a one-for-one impact. So if we half one of those or double one of those, all emissions would essentially be halved or doubled. So I bring that up because sometimes we receive critique around why there's such a large reduction between 2013 and 2014. And I highlight here what was going on with regulation number 7, AQCC Reg 7. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. Everyone is probably much more familiar with this than I am. But notably in 2008, new controls on tanks took effect statewide instead of just for the 9-county area. And then the largest impact was really seen in May 2014, when the threshold for controls on tanks was reduced statewide to 6 tons per year instead of 20 tons per year. So that roped in a very large population of tanks. And that's where we expect that the emissions after that were greatly reduced. Now, the challenge we always have for oil and gas in particular is that there's no historical data that we can just say, this is it, this is the number, we have the super high confidence in everything. A lot of the data that is needed for these estimates either wasn't really collected until later years, or we just don't have any confidence that it was done to a caliber that could be used for estimating statewide. So the workbook relies heavily on VOC estimates as a proxy for estimating other greenhouse gas estimates. So I think there's a lot to talk about here, but I'll keep it short and move on to the next one. So this is the net impact across statewide inventory estimates. So that ranges from about a 4 to 6% increase across the historical time series. Not much more to speak on this slide. Okay, so now the meat of all of it is really, what does it say for our projections, our future projections for the sector? And if you recall, our team is responsible predominantly for estimating historicals, and we work with RMI. and their use of Energy Innovations Energy Policy Simulator tool. That's an online tool. It was the Energy Office and part of the Roadmap 2.0 process selected RMI specifically because of this tool. And really, the choice was strongly around wanting to have publicly accessible methods. And so while there are underlying customizations to the tool, and really what that means is calibration to our historical estimates, everything beyond that, then every policy that was modeled for Roadmap 2.0, there's a method behind how that was done, and anyone can play with those using this simulator. So it was a very convenient tool for everyone to be able to use. So what we see is that the dotted lines were previously estimated future emissions for the oil and gas sector. And our historical estimates extend up through 2020. And there you can see going up to the solid line then is our revisions to the historical estimates. And then all the lines beyond that through 2050 are the projections. And again, here, those dashed lines are what was estimated for the 2023 inventory and the roadmap. And then the solid lines represent the updates to those scenarios. So in case you're not familiar, there were 3 scenarios modeled for Roadmap 2.0. The first one is just a business as usual scenario. That's what we might expect in the total absence of policies, both federal and state. So kind of a state as is. But really, when we speak to expected future emissions, we either refer to the roadmap baseline scenario, and in that case, that's this gold line. And what that did was it took into account both federal and state policies and funding opportunities up through the end of 2023. Beyond that, there's the near-term action scenario, the NTA. That's the green line. And that includes all future near-term actions that the state is hoping to take on as part of this Roadmap 2.0 set of policy actions. So it's not all future actions, it's really the near-term actions in the future. So between now and I think 2026, 2027, that are expected to be enacted. And so those are the 2 policies we typically refer to when we're talking about expected future emissions. And what you see here is that there's a very significant decline in oil and gas in particular through 2025. And then a large decline still through 2020 or 2030, and then a steady decline out through 2050 still. And there's different policy actions that go in to drive that, but really the major driving factor here is AQCC adopted an upstream intensity verification rule, I believe in 2023. And what that did is set declining caps on sector-wide, or not sector-wide, sorry, but upstream emissions intensities, greenhouse gas emissions intensities. And so that takes effect for 2025 emissions. And what we saw then is that the work that was previously done with RMI to build these projections, we knew what that upstream intensity value is, and we had an estimate for how much of upstream accounted for combustion versus all the other fugitives and leaks that we were just talking about. And we also had a pretty solid understanding of what production is likely to look like. So that production value is and the intensity value are what set those emissions. So in terms of upstream emissions, which is estimated to account for almost 85% of sector-wide fugitives and leaks, those emissions weren't changed because of our update. Those were already set essentially in stone because of this rule. Why we see an increase relative to the dashed lines to the solid lines now is all the other unregulated emissions across the oil and gas sector. So our historicals increased, so future emissions for those unregulated emissions would also need to increase. So that's what combined, that's what really defines this steep trajectory that we're seeing. And then wrapping up here, in terms of statewide projections, we can see a similar trend. A large reduction here is one, oil and gas, but predominantly improvements in electric power. So converting from coal to natural gas or even to renewables is what's driving the largest reductions here in terms of magnitude for statewide. But oil and gas has a very significant role to play in these numbers as well. And so the updates that you see, the gaps between the dotted and dashed, are only due to the three changes that we talked about at the beginning. So predominantly oil and gas updates, but also crankcase venting, and then in the future, these land use policy actions. So that wraps up everything I really have to talk about. I'd like to just be able to direct everybody to our websites where you can download all the data. You can download this oil and gas emissions inventory tool. We have different data explorers that we've now published. These are all new things for us. So there's a greenhouse gas metrics dashboard that has been active since 2021, and that speaks to kind of the drivers of emissions, quote unquote activity data, things like oil and gas production values, fuel use, consumption, all that kind of stuff. But we also produced two new explorers, and one is specific to our greenhouse gas inventory as recently updated and published November 7th. And then also we collect facility reported data under our air regulation 22, sorry. And we have made a large portion of that data now available on this Explorer. So all of these we're going to be working to improve over time along with our methods as well. But that's all I have for you today. Let me stop there and open it up to any questions.
Thank you very much. Trying to find my unmute button. Commissioners, we have Mr. Twyman available for questions from the presentation. Are there any questions? Commissioner Oath?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Twyman, thanks so much. First, just a comment, really appreciate the department's efforts to kind of continually refine and update this inventory over time. It's a complicated tool with many, many factors to it. So appreciate that. You know, there will be times when we catch things that need to be adjusted in order to be more accurate as we move forward in this work. So my question is, I and maybe many others tend to think about our goals in terms of percentages instead of the million metric tons. So could you speak to what this means in terms of, and sorry if I missed it, but what this means in terms of meeting the statutory percentage reduction goals?
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner F. Yeah, so I probably glossed over this, but the oil and gas sector has statutory reduction goals of 36% by 2025 and 60% by 2030, both relative to a 2005 baseline. So I don't have those marked on this particular graph, but under the December release of our inventory, we already showed that the oil and gas sector was expected to surpass both of those goals. And now with these updates, the 2025 goal in particular is now more surpassing the goal with a larger buffer. And the 2030 goal, is also surpassing by a larger degree, but not to the same magnitude as the 2025 goal. And again, that is really because just thinking of terms very simply here, the 2005 baseline increased by roughly 6 million tons. But that 2025 goal, which 85% of that essentially comes from the upstream segment, did not change. And so what we see, relatively speaking, is a larger expected reduction compared to that baseline year. And that's why we see the goal being surpassed by a larger margin now.
Really helpful. Thanks.
Very welcome.
Other questions for the panel? All right, seeing no further questions, really appreciate the presentation.
Wonderful.
Assume that presentation is going to be made available to us and or the public. Probably already is at CDPHE. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, Commissioner Robbins, this you may have noticed this was for a greenhouse gas resolution subcommittee meeting that I've shared again here. These are available. I will be sure to share the specific presentations with everyone here.
Sounds great. Okay.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Great. Thank you very much. We now, why don't we take just a couple of minutes to load up the docket 241000246 Class 6 rulemaking. This is the next order on our agenda, and we have a few public commenters. So if Mr. Thomas could locate them, get them loaded up. Let's take 5. Let's return at 9:36, and we will get started again then. All right, welcome back. Good to see everybody again. We will open up docket 241000246, the Class 6 rulemaking. The first order on the agenda says introduction of rulemaking. Looking to staff, do we have any initial introduction, or are we just moving straight into public comment? Mr. Thomas?
Mr. Chair, I believe the plan is to move directly into public comment.
Okay. Well, again, this is the carbon capture and storage Class 6 rulemaking that staff has been working on with our stakeholders for quite a bit. We move into public comment. We start with Maury Wolfson.
Hello. Can you all see me?
Yes, and we can hear you
Great.
as well.
Okay, thank you. Introduce myself. My name is Maury Wolfson. I'm a 4th generation Denverite. I've been following the carbon capture topic for about 5 years. As a layman, I am not professionally engaged or in business with the topic. I follow policy issues across the broad spectrum of energy and environmental topics. I decided to participate in this today to perhaps provide you with some information that you may not have brought to the surface. And so I'm not directly addressing the Class 6 laws specifically in a detailed way like some of your stakeholders might. I essentially have been watching the kind of what they call the journey here in Colorado for carbon capture and sequestration, and have watched the legislation, have watched the change of your name of your agency, and have seen what's been happening there. It's been a tremendous amount of effort that your commission and others have put into this topic. I'd like to just bring a couple of items to your attention, and I call this big picture. You have spent a tremendous amount of information, of time and effort on this, and it's understandable that you are following the legislative directions that were presented to you over the past few years. I must say that my take on it is that a lot of it has been essentially misguided. And I say that in a reserved sort of a way, in that when you look at the really fundamentals, the underlying economics and rationality and even the physics of carbon capture, you likely have learned that this is more than a challenge. This is actually a lot of it is like what I will call magical thinking. Now, if you follow the topic of carbon capture globally, you will see that there's a lot of hype, and a lot of the hype has been put there through the political economy. So I would just ask you to always keep in mind as you move forward that you're spending a lot of time on this, and it's just my projection that this entire enterprise is actually going to be falling. It's only being propped up through the political economy, through the constant repetition of statements like all of the above and every tool in the toolbox and so forth. So I would encourage you to, I actually want to compliment the commission and the staffs for the tremendous amount of work that has gone into it. But I must say, it's a little bit dismaying and almost disheartening that the people who have such talent have spent so much time on this particular topic, when I would project that there's probably never even going to be a single Class 6 well ever drilled in this state. Okay, there's only 11 in the entire United States of America. 11. There's 1 million oil and gas wells. 1 million. So something is like awry, and it is basically people who believe that we need all of the above, and these kind of memes need to be eventually addressed head on. So I do thank you for the opportunity to provide this public comment. And I do want to thank the commission and the staff for the tremendous amount of detailed work that has been done on it. I just hope that eventually we'll kind of snap out of it and realize that this whole enterprise is flawed at root. Thank you very much, Mr. Robbins.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Appreciate your being with us and taking time out of your day to present public comment. We now will hear from Paul Coonan.
Hi, thank you, commissioners. My name is Paul Coleman. I live in Boulder. I'm a Colorado native. I got my degree in physics from the University of Colorado in Boulder. And my big concern about these Class 6 wells has to go down to the word permanent. The intent of these wells is to help mitigate climate change. And CO2 is a very long-lasting gas in the atmosphere. CO2 can stay in the atmosphere for thousands of years. So permanent doesn't mean 100 years. Permanent means permanent on geological timeframes. So this is the intent of the General Assembly. When they passed the bill, they put in the word permanent multiple times in the bill. I assume they were emphasizing that aspect of this bill. So to ensure that this storage of CO2 to mitigate climate change is permanent on the scale of has an effect on climate change, it needs to be stored for at least 1,000 years. This is going to take continuous monitoring, and this doesn't mean go out once a month and check. I mean, we know that this concentrated CO2 is dangerous stuff, and if you're going out and checking the wells periodically, chances are you're going to miss a catastrophe. We need to monitor these wells continuously to make sure that they're permanently storing the CO2. We need to hold the oil and gas industry, or whatever industry is actually storing this gas, needs to be, the industry needs to be held accountable. And that means there should be some pretty stiff fines if they leak this CO2. This is very dangerous stuff to be leaking. So that's my main comments. Thank you all for your hard work and your attention.
Thank you very much,
speak to you
Mr.
later.
Coleman. Appreciate you being with us this morning and providing your public comment. We now will hear from Natasha Legere.
Good morning, commissioners. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Good morning again. Natasha Leger, Executive Director, Citizens for a Healthy Community. CHC is a grassroots nonprofit organization of over 500 members based in Paonia on the Western Slope, dedicated to protecting the air, water, and food sheds of the North Fork Valley region from the impacts of oil and gas development. We're here today because the Western Slope, excuse me, the Western Slope is warming disproportionately compared to the state, and the nation, and concern over carbon capture storage facility failures. We understand and appreciate the complexities of this rulemaking, including the alignment with EPA rules and the state's application for Class 6 well primacy. We also recognize that the state has specific climate goals and that the Commission is bound by specific standards and a mitigation hierarchy to protect public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife. The purpose of HB 231346 is to permit and regulate the permanent geological storage of carbon dioxide in order to achieve the state's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, reduce carbon dioxide pollution, support a just transition and environmental justice, protect disproportionately impacted communities, and safely and responsibly permanently sequester carbon dioxide. The largest carbon capture storage facility in Illinois leaks. Getting this rulemaking right is critically important so that new problems are not created. We support Colorado Coalition for a Livable Climate and 350 Colorado's recommendations for improving the draft rules, including definition of permanent and explicit reference in the rules that the stored CO2 cannot be withdrawn, robust monitoring requirements, prohibition on the use of converted Class 2 wells to Class 6 wells for enhanced oil recovery, and language on protection against leakage to the surface. In addition, we note that the rules make no reference to carbon dioxide pipelines required for transport to storage facilities. While we recognize that CO2 pipelines are not within the Commission's jurisdiction to regulate, it must consider the cumulative impacts of permitting a Class 6 well on creating the need for CO2 pipelines to transport the CO2 to storage, and that those pipelines are currently unregulated, and how that pipeline risk factors into no net negative impacts. We urge you to amend the rules with these considerations, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for being with us and presenting the public comments. Mr. Thomas, I believe that is the entirety of folks that signed up for public comment. Is that correct?
That is correct. There are a number of written comments. Those have been added to the rulemaking portfolio.
Right. There are 49 written public comments, and they are part of our portfolio and have been reviewed by commissioners ahead of the hearing today. Okay, with that, I believe we next turn to a presentation from the Colorado Energy Office. Mr. Turner?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to present on behalf of the Energy Office. As way of background, again, I'm Michael Turner, Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives and Finance at the Colorado Energy Office. CO is a non-regulatory office of the governor. Its mission is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and consumer energy costs to benefit all Coloradans. The Energy Office collaborates with other state agencies to achieve our state's greenhouse gas reduction targets and administers state and federally funded programs to promote clean energy adoption, energy efficiency, and strategic electrification of transportation, buildings, and industrial end uses of energy. CO submits the following comments in support of the proposed additions and amendments to Energy and Carbon Management Commission rules and practices and procedures found in Code of Colorado Regulations as part of its Class 6 wells rulemaking. CO believes that the rules will help establish an appropriate regulatory structure that provides adequate oversight of an emergent industry while helping to facilitate the expanded use of carbon management in Colorado. Based on analysis done by the Energy Office, we believe that carbon management will play a role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. By way of how carbon management fits into the Colorado's climate goals, through statutes adopted in 2019 and updated in 2023, the state of Colorado set economy-wide goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, 75% by 2040, 90% by 2045, and achieving net zero emissions by 2050 from a 2005 baseline. The state's Greenhouse Gas Pollution Reduction Roadmap 2.0 lays out the state's sector-based approach to achieving these targets, including transitioning to renewable energy, electrifying our transportation, buildings, and industry, and implementing new regulations on oil and gas development. However, our data demonstrates that despite all the work we're going to do to rapidly reduce emissions, the state is unlikely to achieve net zero without carbon management. particularly carbon capture, to address emissions from hard to decarbonize sectors such as cement, and carbon dioxide removal to address residual emissions. As the roadmap notes regarding technological advancements over the last 4 years, these technologies complement ongoing efforts to expand wind, solar, and battery storage to achieve 100% clean electricity by 2040, while deploying technologies such as electric vehicles and electric heat pumps and maximize the value of the clean electricity. It will be imperative to durably store this captured or removed CO2. The best pathway for large-scale, durable storage in Colorado is geological carbon sequestration. According to the National Energy Technical Laboratory, Colorado is estimated to have an approximately 134 billion metric tons of geologic storage resources within our state borders. While it is not likely or practical for Colorado to fully utilize this available geological storage, they indicate enormous opportunity for the state to lead in the emerging carbon management industry. The development of a robust carbon management industry would not only be a key support for our long-term emission targets, but also for driving meaningful economic and job growth in the state. Underpinning this possibility is the need for a strong and supportive regulatory framework. For this reason, the Colorado Energy Office supports the ECMC's draft Class 6 rules. The proposed rules are robust and, importantly, prioritize protection of Colorado communities while enabling carbon management deployment in the state. Our agency is supportive of how these rules go above and beyond the EPA's requirement, including by requiring no net negative impacts on disproportionately impacted communities. These provisions reflect the state's deep commitment to environmental justice and protecting Colorado's communities that have historically borne the burden from pollution in the state. Additionally, CO is supportive of the regulation of flow lines of carbon dioxide for injection into Class 6 wells. The Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA, does not currently regulate these flow lines, and ECMC's proposed rules would create a strong framework to address the gap and better protect Colorado communities. Finally, we appreciate the deep coordination ECMC has done with the EPA to develop these rules. While ECMC will continue to monitor any new developments and partner with EPA, the work to develop these rules must move forward without further delay. Given the immense interest from private industry in investing in carbon management infrastructure in Colorado and the urgent need to use carbon management as one tool in our work to reduce the impacts of climate change, further delay on this rulemaking is unwise and unnecessary. We respectfully request your support in adopting these rules and recognizing the importance of carbon management in Colorado to meet our climate goals and provide a predictable, efficient regulatory environment to ensure we capitalize on this opportunity. Again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Turner, for the presentation. I really appreciate the coordination from CEO with the work that we are contemplating doing today. Just kind of a general question. We've got the rules as drafted by staff that were released a week or so ago. Are your comments supportive of that draft as drafted now without further changes?
Yes, that is correct.
And that's based upon the fact that from CEO's perspective, these rules are necessary to create a protective baseline regulatory floor for CCS, which is part of the greenhouse gas strategy that you've promoted.
Yep, that's accurate. We think it finds the right balance between that regulatory environment and protections for communities.
Great. No, I really appreciate the presentation and the input from Colorado Energy Office. Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Oath?
Thanks. And Mr. Turner, thanks very much for being here. It is very helpful to understand the Energy Office's perspective. Questions I have, I don't know if you'll be familiar with, so I'm just going to put them out there. And if you don't have familiarity, no worries. So the first is we've already heard from public comments today, and then a lot of the pleadings about the importance of permanency. So do you have familiarity with kind of Class 6 wells and even kind of from an energy perspective, looking out into the future and likelihood potential for these Class 6 wells in the future to need to, or there to be desire to convert them and pull the carbon back out for use?
Yeah, I do have some knowledge of that, but I also have Quinn Antis, who's our carbon management program manager at the Energy Office, available. I think she has some more in-depth detail about durability and long-term stewardship of the emissions. Quinn, do you have a direct response to that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Ms.
hi,
Antis.
thank you so much. Quinn Antis with the Colorado Energy Office. I focus on all things carbon management. We do not foresee any need to pull the CO2 back out from Class 6 wells after it has been sequestered. The real value is that this is an incredibly durable form of CO2 storage. The Energy Office has been engaging in developing a carbon management roadmap for the state, which is inclusive of all different types of carbon management technologies, including nature-based solutions and really durable technological solutions, including geologic carbon storage. And as we've been assessing different types of technologies, durability is the key factor. And because of how important it is that we keep CO2 sequestered, because of how much we are contending with, solutions that have much higher durability factor are the ones that our state is prioritizing in terms of our strategy. So for that reason, the durability of geologic carbon storage actually is the reason that it makes it such a critical component of our state strategy.
Great, thank you. And then that's really helpful. On a different topic, it's kind of a factual just question to try to understand. How familiar are you, or either of you, with the two, as I understand it, there are kind of two projects that are in the works here in Colorado. Is that accurate? And how familiar are you with those and like their location in particular?
Yes, so we're currently tracking all the different carbon management projects. I believe you're referring to the two Class 6 permits with EPA that have been submitted for in-state Colorado. Yes.
Yeah.
I would hazard a guess that some of the ECMC folks on this call are more familiar with this project than we are, but happy to weigh in however I can be helpful.
Well, what I'm just wanting to understand is, given the statutory restrictions on locations, like 2,000-foot setback, for example, and some additional evaluation that needs to occur for locations in a disproportionately impacted community in terms of net adverse impact. Just curious if you all know, if you've looked at it from that proximity standpoint.
Yeah, I have. And certainly I would say Mike Rigby, Mark Seeley on this call are real experts. And so I would love to pass it to them as well. But from the research that I have done into these projects, from the knowledge that I have about where they're sited, the setbacks that they have, these fall within Colorado's proposed Class 6 rules as they stand now. And they are the proposed projects honor the restrictions that these Class 6 rules are proposing.
Thank you.
Other questions for the panel? All right. Well, we again appreciate the Colorado Energy Office participation with us. We're going to be moving into the rulemaking with presentations from stakeholders and suggestions on the rules, and we may want to call you back if that becomes important for us to assess the Energy Office perspective once we start to hear from some of the other parties. So if you could stay tuned, I know how to reach you, and we really appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. At this point, we are going to impanel a staff presentation. We will have Michael Rigby, Mark Seeley, Lauren Mercer, and Benjamin Boudreau going next. And I see that someone's already presenting PowerPoint, so appreciate that as well. Who is going to go first? Mr. Rigby, you are unmuted.
Thanks, Chair Robbins, and thanks, commissioners, for having us. I will start us off. We will be, myself, Lauren, and Mark will all be kind of talking through different portions of this presentation. I wanted to just start by thanking Mark Seeley, Lauren Mercer and Benjamin Boudreau for all of the hard work leading into this rulemaking effort. I also wanted to thank a few others at the ECMC who stepped in and helped on different items recently, including Stephen Schwartz, Kat Campbell, and Alex Axe. And then lastly, I also wanted to just thank the commission as well as all of the stakeholders for the continued input really throughout the last few years leading up to this rulemaking. So thank you so much. We can go to the next slide. Here's our agenda. I will kind of start with a little brief background and history leading up to this. We'll then go into the legal requirements for Class 6 wells that will be covered by Lauren Mercer, and then into the Class 6 process and rules in the proposed draft that will be covered by Mark Seeley. So let's begin with some background. I know many of you have seen this slide before. It is a general slide on the technology. And CCS is really a set of technologies and processes designed to eliminate or minimize the release of CO2 into the atmosphere. And this is particularly from industrial point sources. And where we're really focused at today is at the sequestration portion of the slide with the wellbore and the subsurface reservoir that will be containing the CO2. Can move forward. So this slide has a lot, but we've been doing a lot since over the last few years. Really, the primary work for CCS in the state really kicked off, or not kicked off, but really went into full go in 2021. The Greenhouse Pollution Reduction Roadmap identified CCS as a potential tool to be used to reduce emissions from certain hard to decarbonize industrial sectors, and also initiated a task force for the state to review these technologies and their applicability. And it included a large variety of stakeholders and subgroups focused on opportunities, resources, barriers, and environmental justice. The task force final recommendations were released in early 2022. At that same time, ECMC was compiling our first report detailing the resources necessary for a state to pursue primacy. This report was released in late 2021. Building on these efforts, the governor's office issued an action letter for the ECMC to prepare a legislative proposal, which is our second report. That proposal was released in early 2023 and included recommendations for items such as state primacy, pore space ownership, and unitization. Later that year, the legislature signed into law SB 23016, and it directed the ECMC to pursue regulatory authority over Class 6 wells in Colorado, and also included certain requirements that will be discussed in more detail later. The law also directed the ECMC to conduct a safety study over CCS operations to further understand risks and safety considerations related to these operations in anticipation of establishing a regulatory program. That safety study was released earlier this year. Shortly after the release of that study, an additional law, HB 24-1346, addressed some additional Class 6 related items that were not included in the previous law. So that is a real extremely brief summary of the extensive efforts that have really been going on since 2021. I did want to call out the safety study. Since the safety study was intended to further inform our program development, I wanted to really just talk a little bit more about the topics researched and covered within it. The study reviewed safety, regulatory, and impact considerations from the capture facility through the transport portion of the project to the well bore, and ultimately to the subsurface formation for permanent containment. It's a fairly extensive report. It includes quite a bit of technical information. And pertinent to this rulemaking, there are several chapters. There's the applicable Class 6 regulations, considerations for wellbore safety, including wellbore integrity and monitoring. There's subsurface containment considerations, which really gets into the mechanisms that trap CO2 in the reservoir. There's a review of other geologic hazards and recommendations for the safety of communities across Colorado. So with all this said, it was a very brief summary and high-level summary, but the state's taken a thorough and thoughtful approach in establishing a safe and effective pathway for these operations to occur. All of this work has really helped inform the proposed draft rules, including continued discussion with a large variety of stakeholders all the way starting in 2021 until today. And really appreciative of all this previous work, and it really helped get us to where we are today. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Lauren Mercer to talk more about the legal framework applicable to this rulemaking. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good morning to the commissioners, the parties, and the other stakeholders. For the record, I'm Assistant Attorney General Lauren Mercer, and along with my colleague, Assistant Attorney General Ben Boudreau, I'm representing staff in this rulemaking. I'm here to talk about the legal framework that guides this rulemaking. This is a unique rulemaking for ECMC from a legal perspective. Typically, the only limits on the rules that the Commission can adopt come from Colorado law. And here, there are several CCS statutes enacted by the legislature over the last few years that do provide those specific requirements for this rulemaking. Additionally, because the goal of this rulemaking is to obtain primacy from the US EPA to regulate Class 6 wells, ECMC is constrained by the EPA regulations. So the rules that the Commission adopts at the end of this rulemaking must satisfy two fundamental legal requirements. First, they must comply with Colorado statute, and second, they must be at least as stringent as EPA's Class 6 regulations. These requirements guided the rules that staff drafted. And as you can see from this slide, about 2/3 of the draft rules are required to meet EPA standards. Those are largely related to technical downhole matters. The remaining third of the rules are unique Colorado rules intended to both comply with state law and integrate Class 6 into the Commission's existing processes. Now I'll briefly go over the state statutory requirements that we need to fulfill with these rules. This is not an exhaustive list, which could be found in CRS 3460-106, subsections 9 and 9.5. However, I'll review the major ones. First, Class 6 wells are required to have no negative net cumulative impacts on a disproportionately impacted community. And this is a novel standard for ECMC. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to talk in this rulemaking and expect that a lot of the Commission party presentations will focus on what that standard means and how the Commission should apply it. Staff's first attempt at addressing this standard can be found in Rule 1410D. And we did receive a lot of really wide-ranging feedback on this rule. And in light of that feedback, staff determined that it was most appropriate to defer any revisions or additions to this rule to the Commission for consideration during this rulemaking hearing after you've heard from all the parties. Second, the legislature adopted a hard 2,000-foot setback of Class 6 for wells from residences, schools, and commercial buildings. Now, this is different from oil and gas, where ECMC has adopted by rule a presumptive 2,000-foot setback, but there are various off-ramps. Third, statute requires ECMC to ensure that Class 6 operators provide financial assurance sufficient to satisfy both the Act and EPA's requirements. To accomplish this, staff proposes to adopt the EPA financial responsibility rule with only minor tweaks. This rule is very stringent, and Class 6 projects elsewhere in the country have required tens of millions of dollars in financial assurance to meet EPA's requirements. Fourth, a Commission hearing is required prior to issuing any Class 6 permits. Fifth, ECMC's permitting must comply with the local government's siting of the surface facilities. And this is another significant area where the legislature departed from the approach in oil and gas, where the commission must consider the local government's siting but is not bound by it. For Class 6, consistency with the relevant local government's siting disposition is required. Sixth, ECMC must ensure that the geologic storage operator has obtained any air permits required by CDPHE. This is covered by Rule 1418H. Seventh, surface owner consent is required for the siting of surface facilities, and that's covered in 1411D. And finally, the commission must evaluate and address the cumulative impacts of each Class 6 project. On this issue, staff's draft leverages the rigorous rules that were adopted by this commission in October in the cumulative impacts rulemaking, incorporating those rules by reference and applying them to the Class 6 permitting process. The updated draft rules that staff released on November 20th was revised as needed to ensure consistency with those cumulative impacts rules. Now, to ensure compliance with all of these statutory requirements, ECMC drafted a number of additional rules to complement the EPA regulatory requirements. In addition to statutory compliance, these rules are also intended to address procedures related to Class 6 permitting and align those with existing ECMC permitting processes. Of importance to the Commission, these original ECMC rules are the rules where legally you have the most discretion to make changes during this rulemaking. As we'll discuss in a moment, there is much more limited discretion when it comes to the EPA rules, so these areas are deserving of particular attention. As shown on this slide, there are general rules in the 200 and 500 series that apply to Class 6. Also, certain provisions of Rule 1401 applicability are original ECMC provisions, which Mr. Seeley will address momentarily. The application and permitting process rules are the bulk of the new ECMC rules in the draft. Here, staff modeled the permitting, notice, consultation, and public participation processes for Class 6 on existing ECMC processes, while also ensuring that they meet all of the statutory requirements specific to Class 6. And of course, staff drafted Rule 1410 specific to cumulative impacts and disproportionately impacted communities. Next slide. Oh, sorry, not next slide. Additionally, 1411C and D contain additional siting criteria required by statute. And 1420L contains one unique ECMC requirement for testing and monitoring. However, the bulk of Rule 1420 is EPA language. And in addition, the rules listed under related regulatory requirements, such as geologic storage units and the requirements for drilling through or adjacent to a geologic storage facility, are also unique to ECMC. The rest of the draft rules are copied nearly verbatim from EPA's lengthy and highly stringent regulations covering Class 6 injection wells. To obtain primacy, as I stated before, ECMC is required to adopt rules that are, quote, at least as stringent as those federal rules. To meet that stringency standard, EPA has strongly encouraged ECMC to adopt the federal regulations with as few changes as possible. So any changes to these draft rules, mostly the technical downhole rules, would need to be approved by EPA as being at least as stringent as the companion federal rules in order for the agency to obtain primacy. Next slide. So this rather detailed timeline illustrates that to ensure consistency with EPA's requirements, staff has been closely engaged with EPA throughout and even before this rulemaking process began. On behalf of staff, I'd like to take this opportunity to again thank EPA for their timeliness, responsiveness, and collaboration as we've worked through our rulemaking process, particularly the folks in the UIC program and EPA Region 8. We've established, as the slide shows, regular communication with EPA. Our team meets with EPA about twice per month and more frequently as needed based on the stages of this process. Now, these meetings have included technical staff from ECMC and EPA Region 8's UIC program, as well as legal counsel for both agencies. And in addition to these meetings, members of ECMC staff have attended conferences throughout the year that have allowed them to further engage with EPA personnel and understand the federal requirements even better. A very significant milestone in this collaboration process was releasing the ECMC Straw Dog draft rules in early July. That draft we sent right away to EPA, and it was the basis for the EPA crosswalk review process, which included EPA headquarters and EPA Region 8. As the review process progressed, our coordination with EPA shifted to weekly meetings starting in September, with the goal to make these interactions more frequent and allow us to respond to feedback and coordinate in real time. Toward the end of October, we received comments on our crosswalk from both EPA headquarters and Region 8. This feedback highlighted areas for further review and provided us with more clarity on EPA's expectations. Using this feedback, the notice, draft rules, and stakeholder feedback, we created an updated crosswalk and shared it with EPA in early November. EPA sent back their feedback on that crosswalk in mid-November, and staff incorporated all of that feedback into the draft rules that were released on November 20th, which were then also provided to EPA. Based on our engagement to date, staff is very confident that the November 20th draft rules meet EPA requirements and put ECMC in a good position to obtain primacy. Ultimately, our engagement with EPA reflects our commitment to building regulations that are both thorough and in close alignment with the federal requirements. With that, I will hand it over to Mr. Seeley to talk about the draft rules in greater detail.
Thank you very much. This is Mark Seeley. I'm the lead CCUS specialist here at the ECMC, and I'd like to give an overview of the Class 6 permitting process, as well as go through some specific Class 6 rules. This illustration walks through each main step and highlights the rules that govern each stage. On the far left of the illustration are existing well bores or geologic science wells that may be planned to be converted to Class 6. But the official Class 6 development plan process begins with a pre-application meeting, a step that brings together relevant local governments or federal agencies, ECMC, Colorado Department of Health, and CPW, and if the proposed location falls within a DI community, a community liaison. The applicant is also required to hold a pre-application community meeting. These initial meetings allow for all parties, including the community, to discuss any concerns and gain a clear understanding of the project right from the start. One of the primary goals throughout the permitting process is to be deliberate in our notifications and to consider all stakeholders who may be impacted by the proposed project. Following the pre-application step, the applicant will submit a Class 6 development plan. ECMC staff will conduct a thorough review to confirm that all required information is provided, and then proceed with the technical assessment to ensure the application complies with our regulations and can become a viable Class 6 project. I would like to point out that this is a very thorough step in the process. As the EPA indicates, it takes them about 18 months to do the technical review. Moving on, if the application is complete, meets technical and regulatory requirements, ECMC staff will issue a notice of completeness. Along with this notice, we will prepare a fact sheet that summarizes the project, and notifications will be sent out to relevant stakeholders. This step is comparable to what the EPA calls a draft permit. This also initiates the main stage that serves as an opportunity for the public to review the project and submit comments. After the public comment period closes, the director will review and issue their findings. The permit will advance to a commission hearing, and the commission will make a formal determination on the permit. Please note where notifications will be sent for each stage of the process. If the commission approves the Class 6 development plan, the applicant gains authorization to construct the well. However, it's important to note that injection activities cannot commence at this stage. To move forward with injection, the applicant must first provide site-specific data if not already submitted. ECMC staff will review this data to determine whether an authorization to inject can be granted, and only upon this final authorization can the operator begin injection activities. Next slide. Rule 1401 outlines what operations are covered when our class rules will begin to apply, and how permits, whether issued or pending with the EPA, will transition to state regulation. As I dive a little more into the draft rules, I want to acknowledge that it's a comprehensive rule set with a lot of detail. Therefore, I won't be talking through every single provision. Instead, I'd like to focus on the key areas that have sparked the most discussion and feedback from stakeholders. So the Commission's 1400 series rules apply to geologic storage operations and operations of geologic storage science wells, geologic storage monitor wells, or Class 1, Class 2, or Class 5 experimental injection carbon dioxide projects who seek to apply for a Class 6 UIC permit for their well or wells. Operators seeking to convert existing Class 1, 2, or 5 to a Class 6 well must demonstrate to the director that the wells were engineered and constructed pursuant to Rule 1416A. And 1416A is the geologic storage operator must ensure that all Class 6 UIC wells are constructed and completed to, number one, prevent the movement of fluids into or between USDWs or into any unauthorized zones. Number two, enable the use of appropriate testing devices and workover tools. And number three, enable continuous monitoring of the annulus space between the injection tubing and long stream casing. Moving along, the Commission's 1400 series rules are effective upon approval by EPA of the Commission's application for primacy over Class 6 wells, which we estimate to be at the end of 2025 at the earliest, but more than likely it will be in 2026. Rule 1401C and 1401D apply to Class 6 permits that have been issued by EPA or permits that have been deemed technically complete, but a final permit determination has not been made. Essentially, these are permits that are in the review process. EPA issued Class 6 permits, so once Colorado obtains primacy, the operator must transfer all necessary permit information, financial responsibility, and other items in order to facilitate the Commission's ongoing regulations of these operations. And it's important to note a geologic storage operator will not be required to apply for authorization from the ECMC if the EPA has issued a valid permit. And just to say, the intent is not to subject geologic storage operators with EPA approved Class 6 permits to the Commission's permitting rules, or to require operators to redo plans that have already been approved by EPA. However, all geologic storage operators in the state will be required to comply with the 1400 series prospective requirements. For EPA pending Class 6 permits, the director will coordinate with EPA and the geologic storage operator to facilitate the efficient review of the well application. And applicants for such transferred permits may seek variances pursuant to Rule 502 from requirements of the Commission's 1400 series rules that are more stringent than EPA regulations. Next slide. Rule 1410 focuses on surface issues regarding geologic storage operations. This includes, but is not limited to, requiring alternative location analyses and cumulative impact analyses for Class 6 wells. It also includes, but is not limited to, imposing a no negative net cumulative impact standards for Class 6 development plans, which propose to situate a working pad surface within half mile of an RBU, high occupancy building unit, or school facility within a DI community. Staff received a lot of input on Rule 1410, but deferred making significant changes to the draft rule. In light of the range of feedback received, staff feels this is a more appropriate issue to work through at the Commission hearing level. In particular, parties to the rulemaking raised two primary concerns with this rule. First is a request to provide more detail as to how the Commission will apply the no net negative cumulative impact standard. Second is consideration of where that standard should apply. Staff proposed that it applies for Class 6 wells within half-mile of a sensitive receptor in a DI community, but it defers to the Commission as to the appropriate area. We did not make a change to how the mitigation hierarchy, we did make a change as to how that mitigation hierarchy is articulated for consistency with the CI rulemaking. Next slide. Rule 1410B, if the Commission determines that the application does not adequately evaluate or address cumulative impacts, the Commission may require any conditions of approval that are determined to be necessary and reasonable to adequately evaluate and address cumulative impacts, or it may deny the application. Rule 1410D, no negative net cumulative impact of NDI community. As mentioned earlier, this rule applies to any proposed geologic storage location with a working pad surface within a half-mile. Rule 1410D2, the Commission will weigh the potential adverse and beneficial impacts of the proposed Class 6 development plan on the DI impacted community to make a qualitative determination of whether the proposed geologic storage operations will have negative net cumulative impacts on a DI community. And then finally, Rule 1410D4, the Commission will deny any application for a Class 6 development plan that would have negative net cumulative impacts on a DI community. We adopted much of Rule 1411 from the EPA regarding siting criteria for Class 6 UIC wells. Rule 1411A states a geologic storage operator must demonstrate to the satisfaction of the Commission that the well or wells will be sited in areas with a suitable geologic system, suitable geologic system has an injection zone suitable and capable of receiving the carbon dioxide stream, and a confining zone that is free of transmissive faults or fractures and has the ability and integrity to contain the CO2 stream and displaced formation fluids. We made two clarifying changes to Rule 1411 in our last draft. First, we made explicit the statutory requirement that an operator obtain surface owner consent. A surface use agreement was already required in the permitting rule, but we determined it was also appropriate to list as a siting criteria. Second, staff revised the language around the 2,000-foot setback to defer to a commercial building unit instead of just a building unit. This change brings the rule in line with the statutory language, which uses the term commercial building. We also added a definition of commercial building unit as a building that is designated for business and produces income, including but not limiting to an office building, retail space, restaurant, or hotel. Commercial building unit does not include residential building units, industrial facilities, or warehouses. The reason for specifying that a commercial building unit is different from an industrial facility is to ensure that our rules don't have the unintended consequence of prohibiting projects that would co-locate an injection well with an emission source at an industrial facility. Those are typically going to be the ideal projects from an impact reduction standpoint because they don't require pipelines or other infrastructure to get the CO2 from point A to point B. Because of that, staff believes this definition is necessary to remain consistent with the legislative intent of reducing impacts to communities from CCS projects. Staff adopted Rule 1423 from EPA regarding post-injection site care and site closure. This is the stage after a geologic storage operator has ceased injection operations, and the Commission intends to incorporate EPA standards for this phase of the operation. Rule 1423A, the geologic storage operator must prepare, maintain, and comply with a plan for post-injection site care and site closure that meets the requirements of Rule 1423B, I'll get to that in a minute, and is acceptable to the Commission. The requirement to maintain and implement an approved plan is directly enforceable regardless of whether the requirement is a condition of the permit. Rule 1423A2, the post-injection site care and site closure plan requirements address critical factors such as pressure changes, the predicted position of the CO2 plume, and associated pressure front at site closure. It also outlines post-injection monitoring methods and schedules, among others. Rule 1423B, the geologic storage operator must monitor the site following the cessation of injection to allow the position of the CO2 plume and pressure front and demonstrate that USDWs are not being endangered. As part of the alignment with EPA language, there is a default 50-year PISC monitoring period, as stated in Rule 1423B1. However, it's important to note that this is just a default timeframe. Operators can request for approval an alternate PISC timeframe during the permitting process, but they will need to technically demonstrate this alternative to the satisfaction of the director. I think it's reasonable to expect that most operators will pursue this option. Rule 1423B4, that the demonstration cannot be made at the end of the 50-year period or at the end of the approved alternative timeframe, as we just discussed, or if the director does not approve the demonstration, the geologic storage operator must submit to the director a plan to continue post-injection site care until a demonstration can be made and approved by the director. Rule 1423C, demonstration of alternative post-injection site care timeframe. At the Commission's discretion, the Commission may approve, in consultation with EPA, an alternative post-injection site care timeframe other than the 50-year default. If the operator can demonstrate during the permitting process, then an alternative PISC timeframe is appropriate and still ensures the non-endangerment of USDWs. Next slide, please. This is the final slide for the post-injection site care and site closure rule. Rule 1423D outlines the notice of intent for the site closure process, which defaults with at least 120 days prior to site closure, although shorter notice periods can be allowed by the director. Rule 1423E requires the geologic storage operator to plug all monitor wells in a manner that will not allow movement of injection or formation fluids that endangers the USDW. And the final rules I want to specifically point out are Rule 1423G. Each geologic storage operator must record a notation on the deed to the facility, property, or any other document that is normally examined during title search that will in perpetuity provide any potential purchaser of the property the fact that pore space has been used to sequester injection carbon dioxide. And it will outline the volume of fluid injected, the injection zone or zones into which it was injected, and the period over which injection occurred. And Rule 1423I, if a geologic storage operator makes a material misrepresentation or omission that causes the director to approve site closure, this commission may reimpose any regulatory requirements pursuant to the commission's rules, including the financial responsibility requirements of Rule 1415. And lastly, I want to clarify that the 1400 rules do not address the minimum timeline for site closure, liability transfer, or long-term site stewardship by the state. These issues we feel are more appropriately handled through legislation. Carbon dioxide flow lines are not regulated by PHMSA, so it's important that we have the proper safeguards in place for the state. To help shape the right approach, we've engaged in discussions with other states and industry leaders to ensure our rules reflect the best practices and provide the necessary protections. The 1435 rule requires operators to register all carbon dioxide flow lines, outlines the proper construction materials to be used, and provides guidance on the applicable technical standards and where the guidelines can be found. 1435B3 outlines the flow line design that geologic storage operators must comply with, specifically Rule 1102C, which is guidance on internal and external corrosion, maximum operating pressures, and having adequate controls and protective equipment to prevent the flow line from operating above the max operating pressure, among others. The remaining regulations focus on the installation, reclamation, marking, inspection, maintenance, and repair, among others. And finally, Rule 1435D, carbon dioxide flow line integrity management. Pipeline integrity management programs are crucial for operators to be proactive before issues arise. Rule 1435D1 says geologic storage operators must implement a monitoring method that quantitatively verifies flow line integrity and provides leak detection necessary to protect public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. The methods must be included in the leak detection and monitoring plan. The leak detection and monitoring plan and any amendments must be approved by the director. We've specified the requirements for a leak detection and monitoring plan while also adding flexibility in the monitoring and leak detection approach. This flexibility will allow operators to implement CO2 specific strategies that are better suited to the unique characteristics of CO2 flow lines. This slide is comprehensive and busy, so let me walk through it. It illustrates kind of the entire Class 6 UIC process and its alignment with the corresponding ECMC 1400 rule set. As shown, the process is divided into several main phases, with the first process step being the feasibility phase, where the applicant conducts initial scoping operations, evaluates site suitability, and performs preliminary site characterization. This phase is critical for determining whether the location is appropriate for long-term CO2 storage and sets the foundation for the project. The Class 6 permitting phase is where operators develop and submit the detailed documentation necessary to demonstrate the project's safety, feasibility, and compliance with regulatory requirements. As you can see in the illustration, there are between 15 and 20 rules required during this CSDP phase. Applicants will need to perform in-depth site characterization studies, including reservoir modeling and the development of several site-specific plans for construction, operation, monitoring, emergency response, and financial assurance. This comprehensive permitting process is designed to ensure the project protects public health, safety, welfare, the environment, wildlife resources, and USDWs before construction and injection activities commence. The pre-injection phase focuses on preparing the site for CO2 storage after the permit is approved. This includes additional reservoir characterization, refining site-specific plans for the injection and confining zones, constructing the injection well to meet regulatory safety standards, and conducting baseline monitoring to establish environmental conditions before injection begins. This phase ensures everything is in place to support a safe and effective CO2 injection operation. The injection operations phase involves the controlled injection of CO2 into the designated geologic storage area, following those previously approved site-specific plans, as well as demonstrating the mechanical integrity of the injection well throughout its life. The post-injection site care phase focuses on long-term monitoring, modeling, and maintenance of the storage site after injection operations have ceased. Operators provide regular reports to regulatory authorities and maintain financial assurance to cover stewardship responsibilities until the site is deemed safe for closure. This phase ensures the integrity and safety of the well site into the future. Most ECMC rules align closely with one specific phase. However, certain rules, as you can see, such as 1414, 1415, 1420, and 1424, among others, apply across all phases of the process. And then at the bottom of the diagram, we've included an approximate timeline to indicate how long Class 6 projects might typically spend in each phase. This diagram not only outlines the step-by-step process for Class 6 projects, but also underscores the robust regulatory framework that exists within each stage. As I said earlier, this comprehensive approach is designed to protect public health, safety, welfare, while safeguarding the environment, wildlife resources, and underground sources of drinking water. As we close this presentation, it's important to recognize this is just one step in the broader process towards achieving primacy. One key ongoing effort is our collaboration with the EPA on the crosswalk of federal and state regulations. As Lauren mentioned earlier, this crosswalk ensures that our rules are at least as stringent as the EPA. Looking ahead, we anticipate submitting our primacy application in the first half of 2025. Before that submission, we will hold a public comment period to gather feedback from stakeholders. Also, we will continue collaborating with other state agencies, including the Colorado Energy Office, APCD, and others, to ensure alignment and comprehensive oversight throughout this process. And with that, we will conclude our presentation for today. Thank you again for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Seeley and Ms. Mercer and Mr. Rigby. We really appreciate the tremendous efforts of staff in this rulemaking. I would start out with just a general comment that this rulemaking, as you have noted in your presentation, is a bit different than some of the other rulemakings in which we've been provided via statute that we need to go do things in rules. Here, we're provided via statute. We need to do things around Class 6, but a lot of it is EPA driven, and really appreciate the coordination and the quote crosswalks. And I would just note for everyone that's listening in who may have not heard that term, I believe that term defines kind of like, here's what we're doing, here's what EPA is doing, here's how they mesh. So they sort of talk to each other in terms of that, so that folks are aware of that. A general kind of global question from me, and then I'll open it up to the rest of my commissioners. You guys have spent, I mean, I think I looked at 16 different collaborative talks with the EPA. You've spent a ton of time working with the parties that have asked to be a part of this rulemaking. You've generated several different iterations, including the most recent, which is the November 20th iteration. Is staff comfortable that for purposes of where we're at now, that the November 20th, I think that's the right draft, is approvable as drafted, and that it is likely to meet the necessary prerequisites from the EPA to sort of get us started on the Class 6 protective protocol that we have?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can take that question. The short answer is yes. Staff has been working closely with EPA, as you noted, and we are comfortable that the November 20th draft puts us in a good position for primacy. Of course, we can't speak for EPA, and the final decision is theirs. But I think we're as comfortable as we can be. Just to provide a little additional color on that, the process has been mostly involving this crosswalk, which you accurately describes. It shows what are the EPA regulations and how do our rules match up with, and how are they match up with those? How are they at least as stringent? We received there have been several versions of the crosswalk based on the different versions of the draft rules. And the November 20th rules addressed all of the issues that EPA has identified to us. So it's staff's belief that, not guaranteeing or speaking for EPA, but that the current draft is in a good position for primacy.
And a sort of a follow-up question, we still have some stakeholders who are articulating that additional things should be brought into the rules and regulations, that they ought to be more stringent in certain areas. What is staff's perspective with regard to those continued asks from some of our stakeholders?
So I think I'm happy to speak to specific asks if there are certain things on your mind. I think, at the core, any changes, especially to the sort of EPA rules, post-production site care, the more technical rules, we would need to, if the commission were desiring to make changes to those, we would strongly recommend that we bring those changes back to EPA to ensure that EPA approves of them before the commission adopt any final rules, just to make sure there's not any sort of unintended consequence that interferes with stringency. I'm not sure if Mr. Rigby or Mr. Seeley have any more to say there.
And maybe what we'll do is, we're going to hear from all the parties, and we might bring staff back up after to provide some perspective on the things that we might hear over the next day or two as we go through the rulemaking. Really, again, really appreciate the extensive efforts of staff. To the 72 people that are listening in, I don't believe we can accurately summarize the exhaustive efforts that our staff has put into getting us to the draft that we're in now, and it is thoroughly appreciated. The state of Colorado is very much in gratitude to the great work that you've done. I want to thank Director Murphy for assembling a really fantastic subject matter expert team to help us initiate this great work in this new arena for the Energy and Carbon Management Commission. I'll stop mumbling and I'll look to my fellow commissioners who may have more specific questions. Commissioner Messner?
I too want to thank staff for the quality of work that's been done on the draft rules and the things leading up to the draft rules. I appreciate the number of studies that were developed prior to the development of the draft rules and the thorough evaluation of lots of different information to get us to where we are today. And so I do appreciate that. I also appreciate the presentation that talks about how we have a kind of a dual responsibility here in this rulemaking to both follow statutory direction that was provided to the commission, as well as to follow the EPA requirements as a baseline for our rules. And I think that's an important thing for us to consider. As to the statutory direction, at least I thought I heard in your presentation that you left two things for us to ponder in this rulemaking, or deferred to us. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to make sure my notes are right, but there was some discussion of deferring some decision-making around the no net negative cumulative impact interpretation and application in the rules, as well as the overall determination of the area of application of that no net negative cumulative impact standard. Am I right there, or am I missing anything?
Yes, that is correct, Commissioner Messner.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's the only question I had. I mean, I would like to ask some questions as the rulemaking goes on about some technical things that are being brought up in some of the pre-hearing statements that I think I need to lean on staff to better understand. And so if it's more appropriate, I would ask those questions after those presentations have been given by those parties, if staff would be available for that.
Seeing nodding of heads, so staff will definitely be available. Commissioner Oath with a question.
Yeah, thanks. As the other said, really appreciate all of the work that's gone into this so far. Just have a couple of questions. I too will probably reserve a number of questions till later in the process, but can you all give us a sense of what a Class 6 well site looks like, kind of during drilling, but kind of especially long term in terms of potential emissions or surface impacts?
Sure, Commissioner Oath, I can take this one. During drilling, there's a drilling rig. It's going to look somewhat similar to a lot of drilling operations, drilling a deeper well. That, of course, is a more temporary kind of impact. But once they go into operation, these are, I would say, there's a lot less going on than what you would see at like an oil and gas location, for instance. Primarily, there's just the injection wellbore. There could be some other parts and pieces there, depending on if, let's say, you co-locate a monitoring well on the site. There could be a monitoring well. There could be portions where, like, let's say a pipeline comes up to the surface to then connect to the wellhead. But that is about it. There might be some additional monitoring equipment, like air monitoring equipment, things of that sort, depending on the project. But from the location I've been at, an active injection location, there's much less going on the location. And the primary thing on there is the wellhead.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Rigby. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chair.
Others with questions for the panel? Commissioner Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And no questions for me. I just want to reiterate the appreciation for all the hard work done on this. As was noted, this is a very unique situation to have to not only deal with what legislative mandates we have, but also dealing with what EPA has. And so the constant hard work and efforts to meet with the EPA and meet with our legislative mandates are greatly appreciated.
Other questions for the panel? Okay, seeing no further questions, I know staff plans on sticking around and listening to the rulemaking. We appreciate that, and I feel it's likely, if not probable, that we will invite you back for some follow-up questions once we hear from the parties in this rulemaking. Next on the agenda was to be a presentation from CDPHE, but I understand the CDPHE presenter is not quite available. They had timed their day out due to sort of the timing of where we're supposed to be, and we're about 40 minutes ahead of time. So I'm going to take a quick break. Let's take 10 minutes, return at 11:01. And in that interim, would ask Hearings Manager Thomas to see if we can go ahead and bring up the first stakeholder party, 350 Colorado, for their 30 minutes of presentation. So you're ready in 10. We'll reconvene the Energy and Carbon Management Commission on docket 241-000246, the Class 6 rulemaking. Just before we move in, Mr. Thomas, it looks like 350 is ready to go. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So we'll adjust the calendar, and we'll hear first from 350, and then we'll likely hear from our sister agency, CDPHE. I would like to note for the record that at least two commissioners have a hard stop at 4 today. So just everybody be aware that that's going to be our end game for purposes of the rulemaking today. We do have this thing set up for 4 days this week, today, tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday. And I believe we should be able to get through it during that time frame. So with that, I would recognize Ms. Leithwood and 350 Colorado.
Hi, Commissioners. Before I start, I just want to say I'm using a different platform today, and so I don't have my two monitors, so I'm going to have to be looking down at some paper notes here. So just bear with me. And with that, I'll go ahead and get started. I'm Heidi Leithwood, Climate Policy Analyst for 350 Colorado. We're a statewide grassroots organization founded to work on the climate crisis and the environmental justice issues that are inseparable from that crisis. Before I go further, I want to go on record that our position is that carbon capture and storage is not yet viable and is a distraction, taking resources away from rapidly decarbonizing. And in fact, the conservative policy roadmap Project 2025 says CCS is not viable and calls for removing federal tax incentives. But we do know that you don't make policy on that, and we're here in good faith to offer suggestions for these rules to ensure that when carbon dioxide is sequestered in Colorado, that the rules are as protective as possible. We have two areas that we'd like to focus on today. First, permanent and safe sequestration with monitoring, verification, and accurate accounting. And second, protection of DI communities. I think we'd all agree that the reason we're looking at carbon sequestration is because the Earth is warming. So I want to begin by putting in perspective the urgency of this crisis. This graph shows temperature rise in Colorado. If global emissions are reduced drastically and rapidly in what is called a low emission scenario, the green area shows that temperature will continue to rise for a while, and then it will start to stabilize. However, if global emissions remain high as they are now, Colorado temperatures could be over 12 degrees Fahrenheit higher than they are right now during the lifetime of a child born today. Already, Colorado's average temperatures are about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than 100 years ago, and 6 of the warmest years in history have occurred since 2012. This is having devastating impacts on Coloradans' health and on our agriculture and recreation industries, and has caused $30 to $50 billion in climate disasters since 1980. This slide shows temperatures of ocean surface and temperatures of air, which have been gradually getting warmer for the past 3 decades. If you look at the slides with the red and blue lines on top, those are the ones referring to this. You can see that in 2023 and 2024, temperatures have been wildly above the range of the past 3 decades. The graphs with the red and blue lines below are showing sea ice levels, which were gradually declining, but again, in 2023 and 2024, the levels are far, far below that range. Climate scientists are very alarmed by this, and they've included this graph along with other evidence in the most recent State of the Climate report that is signed on to by 15,000 climate scientists and published in 200 peer-reviewed journals. It's entered as an exhibit with our written testimony. This slide shows the statutory legislative declaration of HB 24-1346. Legislators intended permanent storage for climate reasons. The Energy Office was also tasked by legislature in a different bill to develop a carbon management roadmap in which carbon storage is defined as, quote, remaining out of the atmosphere for at least 100 years. And you have already heard from the Energy Office today. I saw their presentation recently where they presume geologic storage will last from 10,000 to 100,000 years. Though the word permanent is similar to infinity, we are asking you to use that word in the rules to convey the intention is to take every step necessary to store carbon as permanently as possible. In the bill, in presentations, and in conversations, we're hearing everyone assuming that Class 6 wells will only be used for permanently sequestering carbon. We've heard it from legislators, from DNR staff, from CDPHE, and from the Energy Office. And this morning, the Energy Office emphasized the importance of permanence and said that, quote, we do not foresee any need to pull CO2 out after it's been sequestered. But the rule does not say that permanence is the purpose, and so we're asking that it be revised to make that clear. Here are our proposed rule revisions. First, the definition of geologic storage. I put 2 options on this slide. The first adds the word permanent, but if that's not possible due to the fact that it alters the definition that's in statute, we recommend adding a sentence as shown as the second option on the slide. We also recommend that you prohibit activities that would interfere with permanent sequestration. Our proposed Rule 1404A2F would say no person will withdraw CO2 from a Class 6 well, and no person will conduct enhanced oil recovery or enhanced gas recovery using a Class 6 well. Taking at face value what we've been hearing, these activities are not expected, so why not put it in the rule? If the idea is that it's ridiculous to have a rule about it because nobody will do this, we found that assumption is not quite so clear. And on the next several slides, I'll present evidence to show that ambiguity. First of all, withdrawing carbon dioxide from Class 6 wells, as I've said, is something everyone assumes won't be done, but it's not in the draft rule. Looking at the North Dakota Class 6 wells rules, we see that temporary storage can be done and is even expected in North Dakota. As they state, one purpose of storage is to keep carbon dioxide readily available for industrial purposes. If that's not something we intend in Colorado, this should be in the rule. ECMC Draft Rule 1426B7, which is drawn directly from the EPA Class 6 rules, also makes mention of the possibility of recovering or withdrawing injection carbon dioxide. It is also not clear in the rule whether enhanced oil or gas recovery can be conducted in a Class 6 well, particularly if it has been converted from a Class 2 well. Again, the intent of HB 24-1346 is that Class 6 wells are for permanent storage to achieve climate goals. And we've heard that it's assumed enhanced oil and gas recovery will not be done in a Class 6 well, but this should be put in writing. This slide contains a few examples implying that enhanced oil recovery may be a possibility in a Class 6 well that was converted from a Class 2 EOR well. First, Draft Rule 1426A deals with the conversion of a Class 2 well to a Class 6 well, which is required if the primary purpose is to sequester carbon and if underground sources of drinking water are threatened. According to any regulations we could find, this does not necessarily mean that the enhanced oil recovery will stop after a Class 2 well is permitted as a Class 6 well. It's worth keeping in mind that primary purpose does not mean sole purpose. For instance, the primary purpose could be sequestration and the secondary purpose could be EOR. Draft Rule 1426B states that in determining whether the well should be required to convert to a Class 2 permit, the director will consider reservoir production rates and recovery of carbon dioxide. So to us, this sounds like the well could be continuing to produce oil and gas and withdraw carbon dioxide. Here are the EPA GHG reporting rules for sequestration. This section defines sequestration sources. If you look at C, a well conducting enhanced oil recovery is considered a sequestration source if it submits a monitoring, reporting, and verification plan, or under number 2, if it's permitted as a Class 6 well. So I want to repeat that. A well conducting EOR is a sequestration source if it is permitted as a Class 6 well. In other words, some wells in the United States classified as Class 6 wells may be conducting EOR. If we don't intend this in Colorado, the rules need to make that clear because they do not say anywhere that it's not allowed. Again, the argument that we don't need a rule because nobody will do it is not a viable argument. If it's not in the rule, it could be done. Next, we need to look at the issue of carbon dioxide leaking into the atmosphere. Of course, leaking carbon dioxide is a climate issue, but it can also be a safety issue. Let's look first at an extreme example, a sudden pipeline rupture that puts lives at stake. In 2020, a pipeline rupture in Mississippi was caused by a sudden shift in the land. It resulted in 45 hospitalizations and the evacuation of 200 people. Fortunately, nobody died, but people were still suffering health impacts 3 years later. Carbon dioxide can travel for miles. It's heavier than air, so it stays at ground level and gathers in low-lying areas. People exposed to large levels of carbon dioxide can become unconscious in less than a minute. They can't drive away in their internal combustion engine cars, which can't work in high levels of carbon dioxide, and likewise, emergency services cannot get to them. ECMC does not have jurisdiction over the type of pipeline involved in this accident, but there are several ways that your decisions can protect us from a risk of rupture, even if you don't have jurisdiction over pipelines. In looking at proposed sites, you can consider where pipelines will have to be built to the proposed geologic storage facility. You can ensure no facilities are in areas with geographic instability and that seismic monitoring is adequate. And you can ensure flow lines and equipment are well made with strong materials. You can ensure monitoring and effective shutoff and emergency response. Louisiana has a rule for ensuring that the emergency shutdown system is fail-safe, and we recommend that you adopt this rule for Colorado. Moving away from emergencies to other leaks in the atmosphere, we can see from this rule for GHG reporting and sequestration that some leaks are expected. Take notes of letters D, E, and F. And of course, we want to try to minimize those leaks in Colorado. This slide shows where we might expect to see leaks. In particular, we can see, if you can see my cursor, that along the old oil well, CO2 leaks into groundwater, but also up to the atmosphere next to the well and from the lake. Also note that if leaking carbon dioxide has made its way into groundwater, it can leak up to the atmosphere along a fault line. In this case, it happened because the carbon dioxide got around the cap rock, but it could easily happen if it was entering groundwater from an old well and then found a fault line. The graphic also shows some of the surface monitoring that's important: aerial monitoring and an eddy flux tower. The 2024 study quantifies an average leakage rate of 29% in a geologic storage facility, with a leak rate of 19% along a well. That is an injection well. This study was not in an oil and gas field, so being in an area with a lot of old wells compounds that risk. Other recent studies show that we'll need a high level of protection to ensure that our old oil and gas wells will not risk the permanence of CO2 storage. Although the rules require reporting of characteristics of old wells, many of our wells may be so old that that important information is not available, and there may be unknown wells. The ECMC report on CCS also acknowledges this risk, stating the importance of analyzing the existing wells and correctly characterizing the area. Louisiana has a good solution to this. Their regulations require licensed professionals to prepare and sign the geoscientific analyses and the engineering reports and specifications. We request that this be added to our rule. Excuse me. Our next recommendation is in line with Colorado's climate goals and laws and in line with the intention of HB 241346. The rules should explicitly protect against leaks to the atmosphere. EPA rules were developed under the Safe Drinking Water Act and are designed to protect underground sources of drinking water. Detecting and preventing leaks to the atmosphere comports with Colorado's climate goals and laws, so the intention to do this should be explicit in the rules. Adequate surface monitoring should be required, as recommended in the 2024 study by Sori et al. Here are some recommended rule modifications to explicitly protect against leakage to the surface. We recommend modifying the rule in all cases where the rule references leakage to USDW to add leaks to the surface. The first two recommendations are definitions, ensuring that the corrective actions include the intention to prevent leaks to the surface, and that the area of review looks not only at assessing where drinking water is at risk, but assesses where leaks to the surface have potential to occur. Rule 1408K has to do with reporting, 1408O with mechanical integrity, and Rule 1414 deals again with corrective actions, requiring that they also prevent leaks to the surface. Rule 1420 adds specific surface monitoring requirements, including the eddy flux towers and aerial monitoring. Our next recommendations are on the topics of accounting, verification, and enforcement. Statute requires the CDPHE to develop an accounting procedure for sequestration, and I understand that that is well underway. Statute also requires ECMC and CDPHE to collaborate on this. So we recommend that no permits are considered until the system is in place, and that any data gathered is transparently available and easily accessible to the public. Referring back to our rule recommendation to prohibit withdrawals, enforcement of this should be transparent, and penalties for both withdrawals and leaks should be stiff. Oops. Our next topic is the protection of DI communities. The Environmental Justice Act, HB 21-1266, laid important groundwork. Its aim is to give both procedural protections and also reduce pollution in DI communities. SB 2316 established the requirement to weigh beneficial and adverse environmental cumulative impacts and to deny permits for Class 6 wells that would have a net negative impact. HB 24-1346 again declares it is in the public interest to protect DI communities and advance environmental justice, and it lays out the definition of cumulative impacts. The draft rules do align with the procedural protections established in the cumulative impacts rules in most cases. That includes rules for notice, public comment, and community meetings. We misunderstood the changes in the October draft regarding the community liaison, but we do now see that they are included by referencing the 300 series rules. We want to emphasize how important they will be to the permitting process for Class 6 wells. And we did want to call attention to one discrepancy between the CI rules and the draft rules for Class 6 wells. Comparing Rule 1406E with the Cumulative Impacts Rule 309C, we believe that the community meeting should be held if it is within 4,000 feet of a building in order to be consistent with the cumulative impacts rules. Looking again at statute, the takeaway point on this slide is that cumulative impacts on a disproportionately impacted community are defined as environmental impacts. Here is the language on net negative impacts. If the proposed geologic storage facility or location will have net negative impacts on any disproportionately impacted community, it must be denied. The net negative impacts standard has not yet been defined, as many parties have pointed out. We recommend that there should be some parameters in the rule itself and that a further guidance document should be created with public notice and comment. No permits should be considered in a disproportionately impacted community without specific guidelines for assessing beneficial impacts. Here's our rule recommendation for that, and I'd like to take a moment and walk through it. First of all, the word environmental, which is in statute, is missing from the current rule. Secondly, the rule only specifies a qualitative assessment. Qualitative assessment is very important, of course, but there should also be quantitative assessments where possible. And thirdly, are our recommended parameters for beneficial impacts. Sequestration does not directly benefit the disproportionately impacted community and should not be claimed to do so. Any claimed benefits must occur in the same community as the facility, and beneficial impacts of corrective actions, for instance, plugging or fixing wells, old oil and gas wells, must be demonstrably quantified accurately. Corrective actions performed on wells owned by the operator should not be claimed because these actions serve to rectify defects which should have been remediated anyway. Next, where should this standard apply? We understand that in a huge DIC area, it may not be justifiable to have it apply in the whole area, and it's appropriate to use a proximity approach as you decided to do in the CI rulemaking. But 1/2 mile is not enough. The hard setback is 2,000 feet, and 1/2 mile is just barely more than that. The impact area in the cumulative impacts rules was 1 mile or 2.5 for water. So you should also take into consideration where a pipeline will have to be built and include that as an impact. We feel that 1 mile would be reasonable, and possibly more given the potential safety ramifications of pipelines. And I'd like to end today by talking about the pipelines that you have no jurisdiction to regulate. I want to point out that your decision dictates the choices of where the pipeline is built, and you can protect the community by keeping pipelines further away from them. This slide shows buildings, and then the circle is a 1 mile radius circle. So in example 1, with the facility within that radius and possibly 2,000 feet away from a building, there will be no choice but to propose building a pipeline that goes closer than that 1 mile radius. In example 2, if the facility is outside the 1 mile radius, a pipeline could be still proposed that goes within that 1 mile radius, but it would be possible to build a pipeline and stay out of the 1 mile radius. And of course, example 3 has a much greater possibility of keeping the pipeline away from the community. This protects the community and it helps to build community trust. I also want to mention that we support Wild Earth Guardians, Green Latinos, and ALG in their recommendations, and point you back to the additional recommendations in our pre-hearing statement and response, including an annual fee to go into a fund for the state to monitor wells in perpetuity. And with that, I will close and open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leithwood. Always appreciate you and 350 presenting to us. We have Ms. Leithwood available for questions, commissioners. Commissioner Oath.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ms. Leithwood, for your presentation and involvement in this hearing. Really appreciate it. So just a couple of questions. First one is about permanence. And so kind of the first part of your comments on that. The second part was about leaks, which I appreciate that, but kind of focusing in on the first part of your testimony about the importance of sequestration being permanent. I just want to make sure I understand the full nature of your concerns. And so are they related to any, it didn't seem like that you hadn't raised any concerns related to, surface impacts or anything. It seemed like it was about ensuring carbon accounting and that the role of that Class 6 wells are to play in permanent sequestration of carbon for climate change purposes. So I just want to make sure I got that right.
Thanks for the question, Commissioner Oath. We focused on the climate impacts in this presentation, especially because that's the focus of our group. That doesn't mean that other impacts are not important. And safety and leaks to the atmosphere are both related to leaks of carbon dioxide. But the idea of the permanence is to protect, including permanence in the rule, is to comport with the legislative intent, which is that Class 6 wells are for permanent storage in order to reduce our emissions and work to mitigate the climate crisis. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but we do see that the intent is permanence, and we're hearing everybody say that the intent is permanence and that is assumed. But so we think that should be in the rules, that the intent is permanence, and then to prohibit activities that could get in the way of that permanence, just to make sure it's set down in writing. We understand that everybody is making these assumptions on good faith, but as in anything of importance, it's really not okay to depend on sort of assumptions and gentlemen's agreements. We really think that intention of permanence should be in the rule. And if that's what everybody intends, then there's no harm in putting it in the rule. If that's not what everybody intends, but that's what you intend, again, it should be in the rule. And if it's explicitly not intended, like it is in North Dakota in their rules, we just think that's wrong, that it should not be intended, and the intention should be permanence, and it should be reflected in the rule. And sorry to ramble on and on, but.
No, appreciate it. Thank you for that. And then my other question was related to the net negative adverse impact analysis, and specifically your proposal or suggestion that such an analysis should not be just qualitative, but also needs to be quantitative. And I guess I want to better understand how that would be done and how you would quantify the types of beneficial impacts and all the adverse impacts and have them be a way to compare apples to apples in this type of an analysis?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. I honed in on that because the statute does not say it should be only qualitative. And sometimes in these cases, the qualitative assessment is the most important assessment because there's a lot of things that can't be nailed down with numbers. But if there are some things that can be nailed down with numbers, we think that that should be included, and also that we should make sure that there's a framework for making sure that's accurate. And one of the things that I had in mind was plugging of old wells, for instance. There's a lot of qualitative benefits of that, but operators might also claim they might exaggerate the quantitative reduction of emissions, for instance, because with old wells, they're really not emitting very much at the end of life, or if they're abandoned, they're not emitting a lot. Every little bit counts, but that's where one of the examples of we need to have accurate quantitative numbers for things that can be quantified, and then that needs to be wrapped into the qualitative assessment. Did that?
I think I understand what you're saying.
Question?
I think what I'm understanding is you're not saying that the assessment of determining net adverse impact needs to be a comparison of numbers. I think you're acknowledging that in large part it's going to be qualitative, but part of the qualitative assessment may have some pieces that are quantified.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I just did not want the word qualitative to rule out the fact that it can't just be sort of amorphous, that where there are numbers, they should be used as part of that qualitative analysis and they should be accurate.
Okay. Thank you.
Good questions. Other questions for the panel? All right. Not seeing further questions. Again, thank you very much for being a party and presenting to us.
Thank you, everybody. And I neglected to thank you all for your work and the staff for their extensive work. Thank you.
Very good. All right. I believe we've got Ms. Rowan from CDPHE to make a presentation. You are recognized.
Thank you. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, or CDPHE, really appreciates the opportunity to comment on ECMC's proposed Class 6 rules. House Bill 24-1346 directed CDPHE and ECMC to collaborate on a number of activities related to geological sequestration of carbon dioxide. CDPHE and ECMC staff have been working throughout 2024 to ensure the two agencies are coordinated in implementation of this new statutory direction. CDPHE believes the proposed rules are protective of public health and the environment, will facilitate the collaboration required by statute, and will facilitate the responsible development of carbon management activities in Colorado that will help the state meet our climate pollution reduction goals. House Bill 24-1346 specifically directed CDPHE and ECMC to collaborate on greenhouse gas emissions accounting for geological sequestration of carbon dioxide, as well as assure environmental oversight through applicable air permitting of such operations. My testimony will outline the specific recommendations from CDPHE for the collaboration called for in House Bill 1346. Regarding carbon dioxide accounting procedures for geologic storage operations, CDPHE recommends that they be based on the requirements found in Part 98 of Title 40 of the Code of Federal Regulations, which is the federal mandatory greenhouse gas reporting rule. This rule is incorporated by reference in Colorado's mandatory greenhouse gas reporting rule under Air Quality Control Commission Regulation 22, in accordance with the Colorado Legislature's directive to align state greenhouse gas reporting requirements with the federal reporting regime where possible. Specifically, CDPHE recommends utilizing subpart RR of 40 CFR Part 98, which applies to reporting greenhouse gases from the geologic sequestration of carbon dioxide. Subpart RR defines the source category it applies to as any well or a group of wells that inject a carbon dioxide stream for long-term contaminant in subsurface geologic formations and includes all wells permitted as Class 6 under the Underground Injection Control Program. Subpart RR is what is known as an all-in source category, meaning that any source meeting the source category definition has to report its greenhouse gases under subpart RR to both the US EPA and the Colorado Air Pollution Control Division each calendar year. The information reported to the Air Pollution Control Division under subpart RR will be used to meet the carbon dioxide accounting procedure requirements in House Bill 24-1346 and will be shared with ECMC per the recommendation outlined below for the meeting the requirement of 2B. And regarding collaboration on data sharing between our agencies, CDPHE recommends that ECMC and CDPHE develop a memorandum of understanding that outlines how data will be shared to facilitate the monitoring, verification, and accounting of carbon dioxide in geologic storage operations. As noted above, CDPHE recommends using subpart RR of 40 CFR Part 98 to meet the carbon dioxide accounting requirements and will share the relevant information collected through this mandatory reporting requirement with ECMC. CDPHE also understands that ECMC's proposed primacy rule for permitting carbon dioxide geologic storage operations contains monitoring, reporting, and verification requirements, and that data obtained through these requirements can be shared with CDPHE according to such an MOU as well. Regarding ensuring facility compliance with air permitting requirements, any source of air pollutant emissions in Colorado is already automatically subject to permitting requirements administered by CDPHE if applicable permitting thresholds are not met. CDPHE recommends that the MOU specify how the integrity of air permitting requirements will be maintained as called for in House Bill 24-1346. Draft ECMC Class 6 rules require consultation with CDPHE during the permit review process and include a requirement for the operator to obtain any necessary air permits prior to commencing injection operations. The MOU could further clarify any actions to be taken to help facilitate the existing regulatory authority. And that concludes my remarks today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And commissioners, I've been informed that CDPHE is happy to address any questions that may be submitted by us to them in writing. And so just reserve your questions, get them over to Hearings Manager Thomas. We'll get it over to CDPHE if we have any questions. I guess my only sort of comment at this point is the points that were made. In my opinion, I'm not sure they need to be in rules, but I do think that the concept of the MOU and sort of working out the details does make some sense. I don't know if it's necessary. In fact, I don't think it's necessary for us to do that now. Let's figure out our rules, get them in place, and then sequentially proceed down MOU step, before or after we look for primacy from EPA. I'm seeing some nodding of a head in the up and down direction from Ms. Rowan. So hopefully that's consistent with CDPHE's thoughts as well. So with that, we will allow you to move to your regularly scheduled business. Really appreciate you being with us and making the comments to us and to our stakeholders today. All right, Hearings Manager Thomas, I know we've had some jumbling around of presentation schedule. Do we have Wild Earth Guardians next?
That is the plan. I'll be elevating Miss Merlin now.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and try to get Wild Earth Guardians in before our lunch break, and then we'll take a break and come back in the afternoon.
Thank you. Commissioners, would it be possible, to seek a 5-minute recess? I was anticipating Green Latinos going next, and I hadn't printed out my
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
We will take a 5-minute break. We'll return at 11:45. Definitely want to give you a chance to get ready. So thank you very much. We will call the meeting back to order. We're taking up docket 241-000-246, the Class 6 rulemaking. Good morning.
Morning. Commissioners, thank you. Let me go ahead and share my PowerPoint presentation and see if I can put it in presenter mode. Can you see this?
Yes, we see it.
View
Not quite in presenter mode yet.
slideshow. There we go. That should.
There you go. Yep.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry if I'm a little disjointed. I had a death in the family last week and the funeral was here. So I didn't have as much time to go over my notes. So I hope this makes sense and I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards. Good afternoon. Good morning, commissioners. Thank you for being here for party presentations for this Class 6 rulemaking. My name is Catherine Merlin. I'm an attorney based here in Colorado representing Wild Earth Guardians today. We would also like to echo the sentiments of 350 Colorado, which were just stated about carbon sequestration technology. Wild Earth Guardians believes that carbon sequestration is a dangerous distraction, which diverts resources from the most effective forms of climate mitigation, prolongs and subsidizes the oil and gas industry, provides greenwashing in the form of so-called net neutral fossil fuels, reduced legislative or regulatory pressure to act meaningfully, and to improve the ESG profiles for fossil fuel companies seeking naive investors. However, we understand that there is a state mandate in place for this commission to explore carbon storage as one possible tool in the state's array of climate mitigation efforts, and we are here in good faith to seek rules which give the best possible chance that carbon storage will be used appropriately as a climate mitigation tool and avoid prolonging and exacerbating unjust environmental harm to already disproportionately impacted communities. And I would like to thank the staff for the time that they put in speaking with me personally and working on these rules. They've just been excellent. So thank you so much for all of the work that you've done. I wanted to ground my presentation today in the legislative enactment which brought us here. In 2024, 32 of our strongest climate champions in the Colorado legislature, Representatives Titone and McCormick and 18 of their fellows, and Senators Hansen and Priola and 9 of their fellows, introduced HB 24-1346, which expanded this commission's authority to include regulation of geologic storage operations. This is the language of the statutory amendment which empowers and constrains you today, along with the EPA regulations which set the minimum regulatory floor for the state to obtain primacy over the permitting of Class 6 geologic storage wells. Among the 5 goals listed here, helping the state reach its greenhouse gas reduction goals, reducing atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, providing a just transition for workers, advancing environmental justice and protecting disproportionate impacted communities, and permanently storing carbon. The word permanent is used twice. Never in the legislative history of this bill or in any other piece of legislation governing this rulemaking were increased carbon dioxide enhanced oil and gas recovery mentioned as purposes or goals, and the fact that there are significant statutory and other state resources which indicate that this should be prohibited as contradictory to Colorado's climate goals. The first Colorado GHG roadmap noted that the largest sources of greenhouse gas pollution in Colorado are transportation, electricity generation, oil and gas production, and fuel use in residential, commercial, and industrial spaces. That achieving the 2030 goals will rely on deep reductions in pollution from electricity generation by continuing the transition to renewable energy, as well as deep reductions in methane pollution from the oil and gas industry, which makes up the largest source of non-combustion emissions in the state. It was stated that all sectors have an important role to play in emissions reductions if the state is to reach 90% reductions by 2050. Every sector that is a significant energy producer or consumer, including electricity generation, oil and gas production, transportation, buildings, and industry, would need to achieve emissions reductions of 90 to 100%. Wild Earth Guardians is here today because we perceive a danger in this rulemaking which was required by the legislature with only climate and environmental justice goals, could inadvertently result in rules which perpetuate and exacerbate existing climate and environmental justice harms, despite what I believe are sincere intentions by staff to write strong and protective rules. This includes imperiling communities by growing the network of pipelines transporting supercritical carbon dioxide, turning tax credits meant for climate protection into subsidies for increased fossil fuel production through enhanced oil recovery, and greenwashing the incredibly urgent and increasingly dire threat of continued fossil fuel production and consumption by creating marketing and socially conscious investing opportunities for what is incorrectly and improperly described as net neutral fossil fuels. This slide conveys a summary of our 8 main areas of concern. We believe these areas require some additional consideration by this commission and modification of the proposed rules. The first 2 issues, which involve the need for prohibiting extraction activities from Class 6 wells, either the extraction of fuels, which is another way of saying enhanced oil recovery, or the extraction of carbon dioxide from Class 6 wells for the use in other enhanced oil recovery operations. Class 6 wells are intended to be permanent storage of carbon dioxide that protects groundwater sources for the benefit of the climate, and allowing enhanced oil recovery or the facilitation of enhanced oil recovery from these wells is a direct contradiction of those goals. The next 2 issues are concerns about the corrosive potential of supercritical carbon dioxide. In the presence of water, whether it's coming from an imperfect capture process or naturally occurring groundwater, carbon dioxide is converted into carbonic acid. Although this acid is described as a weak acid, it is nevertheless more than capable of corroding carbon steel and eroding cement plugs and casing. This fact requires special corrosion-resistant materials to be used in engineering of transport and well completions. Where geologic formations are proposed as potential CO2 storage, it's important that confining layers are intact as possible, which may require the replugging of old well bores which do not have documentation showing that modern plugging standards were adhered to. The 5th concern involves the proposal that ECMC should be allowed to grant waivers to Class 6 well depth requirements. This rule could open the door to inappropriate siting of geologic storage operations, which could have an increased risk of imperiling groundwater, underground sources of drinking water, and requires additional guardrails. The 6th concern involves variances, which requires only EPA consultation, other than for variances to Rule 1403. Because EPA has been under systematic political attack and could be extremely different in 4 years if, in fact, Congress fails to abolish the agency, this consultation requirement should be replaced with a requirement that variances are strongly disfavored, must be proven to be highly protective of groundwater and communities, and cannot fall below any Class 6 standard adopted as an EPA regulation, particularly engineering requirements. Above ground, Guardians is extremely concerned that the rules do not allow for adequate time for communities to engage with proposed geologic storage operators, and that the rules inappropriately limit when impacts to DICs must be evaluated. This slide shows some of the economic incentives for pushing carbon storage, which includes some double dipping opportunities, and some of which are antithetical to climate progress. We should also include for the record that a 2020 investigation by the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration revealed significant fraud in the 45Q tax credit program, with approximately $894 million in credits claimed despite not complying with EPA reporting requirements. While some of the tax regulations were strengthened following this report, an organization called Taxpayers for Common Sense identified several ways in which the federal tax credit system is still vulnerable to abuse. For example, operators claiming EOR credits can choose not to report leakage information, are not required to make their reports publicly available. IRS allows operators to self-certify the CO2 sequestered, and not enough information is required to verify the reporting. Also, neither EPA nor IRS do on-site verification or require third-party verification. Finally, although taxpayers can claim sequestration credits for up to 12 years, both IRS and EPA only require records retention for 3 years after injection, and the IRS can claw back credits where leaks occur within just 3 years, creating a major discrepancy when managing long-term liabilities associated with carbon storage, as leaks can occur well beyond the 3-year retention period. This commission must prohibit intentional removal of either carbon dioxide or hydrocarbons from Class 6 wells or formations into which Class 6 wells have been injecting to reduce the potential that this rulemaking will end up facilitating enhanced oil recovery projects. EOR is not permanent storage of CO2 in that it results in more CO2 emissions from the combustion of the recovered fuels than are sequestered. It has been repeatedly stated that no carbon residence requirement is necessary, and to that end, I would like to know if it is impossible to intentionally withdraw carbon dioxide from a Class 6 well, or to use Class 6 well for enhanced oil recovery, then why not specify that? Put in a residence requirement. Prohibit intentional withdrawal of carbon dioxide or hydrocarbons from Class 6 wells and reservoirs, which are intended to be solely for permanent sequestration for climate purposes. If this is belt and suspenders, then let it be that. We can't afford to be caught with our pants down when it comes to protecting the climate for our children. The proposed rules treat Class 6 wells as if they are inherently permanent storage. ECMC's carbon capture and storage safety and impact consideration from source to sequestration, which was published this year, used the word permanent 20 times. Here's a quote from that study. While enhanced oil recovery may be a minor part of future CCUS development in Colorado, the Colorado General Assembly has been deliberate to ensure that these projects do not receive additional state-funded support and are not a priority for state policymaking. See HB 23-1210, end quote. But we have some evidence that Class 6 wells may be used for enhanced oil recovery unless prohibited by regulation. First, we have the fact that Class 2 wells, which are production wells, may be administratively converted. Furthermore, Class 6 wells themselves can and do produce hydrocarbons, as carbon dioxide is extremely effective at scrubbing residual hydrocarbons from a reservoir. Will the Class 6 well itself be used to remove the carbon dioxide or hydrocarbons? Probably not. The Class 6 well is the source of the injected carbon, which could be removed by another well, as in the example that I am about to provide. We have heard that it will not happen, so please specify it must be in the rules that this cannot happen. This diagram shows some of the ways that carbon dioxide can be injected for various purposes. And I'd like to convey what one expert told me when telling me about his experience with a carbon capture project in Australia, where the company wanted to use a depleted oil field as a carbon sequestration site. Step one of the plan was to terminate the petroleum production license, which involved an abandonment and remediation plan for all of the petroleum wells. Step two was to apply for the sequestration license. Step three was to demonstrate to the regulator's satisfaction that the injecting carbon dioxide was going to be permanently depleted or permanently stored. It's not just as simple as refilling the depleted reservoir, I was informed. However, to satisfy step three and ensure the injected carbon dioxide didn't create enough subsurface pressure to break the sealing unit at the top of the reservoir, the company needed a pressure maintenance well that would produce some of the water that had replaced the petroleum in the reservoir. So step four was to have one of the previous petroleum wells reclassified as a water produces for CCS purposes. The issue was that there was residual oil still in the reservoir, and carbon dioxide is very, in all caps, effective at pushing that oil ahead of the plume. As a result, there would be some small amount of oil produced with the water. Initially, the company announced it would sell that oil. However, the regulator said that under no circumstances can a CCS project produce petroleum. That's an EOR project, and it's not sanctioned in Australia. So step five was that the company had to agree to transport the produced byproduct oil to a second location and to re-inject it, not to be recovered. I would just reiterate, it has been said by industry that this cannot physically happen. It has been said by staff that this is not going to happen. It needs to be said by you that it cannot happen and that it will not happen. Backing up for a moment to discuss the chemistry of carbon dioxide, which is relevant to the two concerns about engineering requirements. As a reminder, those two concerns were one, the perforation of confining layers by old well bores, and two, the relaxation of engineering requirements for well conversion. That is Rule 1401A2, which replaces the engineering requirements contained in 1416B and 1417A with the non-specific and highly discretionary paragraph that is 1416A. We're not raising issues with pipelines only because the ECMC will not be the regulators responsible for regulating pipelines. However, it is those pipelines which pose some of the greatest direct dangers to communities, and we urge the Commission to use the powers that it may have to ensure that pipelines feeding its injection facilities will not pose such danger. Carbonic acid is weakly acidic, but over time and the presence of increased pressure, which supercritical carbon dioxide is transported at, the corrosion can be significant and can cause ruptures. Corrosion-resistant alloys such as stainless steel are necessary in all metals which will come into contact with the gas stream. It's important that every engineered intrusion into the confining layer, including old wellbores, must be engineered to withstand corrosion. That's from a different expert that I spoke to who conveyed that it was typically the engineered intrusions rather than naturally occurring faults and fractures tended to be where the problems occurred. Moving clockwise, these images show, starting on the top left, a carbon dioxide corroded pipeline, then visible corrosion of surface equipment at the Archer Daniels Midland Injection Facility in Decatur, Illinois, where subsurface corrosion of an injection pipeline allowed hundreds of feet of brine migration, which was discovered in 2024. Next, the top right is the aftermath of the carbon pipeline rupture in Sacharsha, Mississippi in 2020. And finally, below is supercritical CO2 leaking from a pipeline in Sulphur, Louisiana in April of 2024. You will notice that many of these incidents are recent, and this is for two reasons. One, carbon dioxide projects are still extremely rare and have not been occurring for very long, so you will not be able to dig long into the past to discover problems. And two, the problem of having a corrosive gas traveling at very high pressure through materials susceptible to corrosion is proving to be just as problematic as one might think. Carbon dioxide is odorless, colorless, and heavier than air. It displaces the oxygen-rich air that we breathe at ground level. Not only does every breathing thing require oxygen, where accidents do occur, neither personal vehicles nor rescue vehicles relying on combustion engines may be able to drive through it. In 1986, a thick plume of CO2 from a volcanic lake in Cameroon killed almost 2,000 people. It was said that birds dropped out of the sky and whole families died together within minutes. It's important to site facilities away from communities in order to minimize the risk of devastating accidents. One of the things that the Commission can do to ensure the integrity of carbon storage facilities is to adopt strict engineering requirements that include the mandatory use of corrosion-resistant materials. However, for converted wells, the proposed rules contain significant exceptions and loopholes to the otherwise stringent engineering requirements for carbon storage facilities. Where wells are converted, the regulations in 1416B and 1417A are replaced with 1416A, which is a much shorter general and discretionary paragraph. When speaking with EPA about this rulemaking, I raised a hypothetical. I asked, what if no one ever drilled a Class 6 well? What if every application is an application for a conversion? For new Class 6 wells, why would operators not simply drill storage science wells, which could then be administratively converted? EPA confirmed that at least twice operators had attempted to do just this, but EPA had rejected those applications and required the operators to recomplete their wells to Class 6 standards. This should be the standard for every conversion, and under no circumstances should conversions simply be allowed to occur without strict engineering standards to ensure that materials are resistant to corrosion. In Rule 1425, which governs depth waivers allowing Class 6 wells above underground sources of drinking water, instead of replacing, it replaces 1416A with 1425F. The provisions of 1425F include many more engineering and construction requirements than 1416A, and we would propose that the requirements of 1425F should be the standard for any well conversion where the requirements of 1416B cannot be met. And I omit stating 1417A because 1425F includes the requirement of compliance with Rule 1417. Rule 1410D limits the applicability of the no net negative standard to storage locations within half a mile of RBUs, HOBUs, schools, and daycares. This limitation is not authorized by statute, which flatly prohibits net negative impacts on DICs. Communities may be greatly impacted for better or for worse by facilities which are not next to their homes. By black letter law, those facilities must be evaluated whenever they are located in a disproportionately impacted community. And lastly, I just wanted to briefly mention that the notice and participation timing we felt was somewhat unduly abbreviated, that 35 days and 45 days are not sufficient time for communities to understand the issues and engage. We've seen how difficult it has been to come up to speed on some of the relevant issues in this rulemaking, which is a short time frame. We've done our best. Communities are not spending their full-time jobs doing this understanding, and we believe that a longer participation period would be important, especially given the emphasis which the Commission itself places on public participation in the 2024 safety study. So the last slide, which I was going to end on, was just to put back the primary areas of concern that we share, starting with the lack of minimum sequestration time and the lack of a prohibition on enhanced oil recovery from Class 6 wells, which I should clarify is not simply removing it via the Class 6 well itself, but removing it from the reservoir, which has been pressurized by the Class 6 well. Penetrations and engineering standards, variances, consultations with communities, and disproportionately impacted communities. And I'll leave that there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Commissioners, are there questions? Commissioner Oath?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And thanks, Ms. Merlin, very much for your presentation. I think just one question actually on the one of the last items you noted about from your perspective, there being inadequate notice of consultation with communities, and appreciating what you're saying about the importance of having sufficient amount of time for potentially affected community members to come up to speed and understand a project and what potential risks or benefits would be for them and their community. Noting that the proposed rules also contemplate and require community meetings 2 times early on in the process, and noting that that is a extremely beneficial way for there to be kind of some conversation and a way for potentially affected community members to get up to speed. I guess I want to understand the extra benefit of more days on the back end when I think the proposed rules contemplate a pretty significant investment of community outreach on the front end.
Thank you, Commissioner Oath. Yes, I think communication is important throughout the life of the project. I think what I'm considering here is just my experience with some of the notice requirements which have been applied for the more traditional production projects, which I've seen. In those cases, when speaking to folks who've been entitled to receive notice, I've heard a lot of stories about things like, a notice came to my house, but it looked like junk mail and I threw it away. I didn't see it. The offer to lease, I didn't know it was an offer to lease. I didn't look at it. When things are arriving in plain manila envelopes, or the notice is maybe put on a government website that folks aren't necessarily checking every day, I think that there is a danger that things get overlooked. I'll use this rulemaking as an example. I expected this rulemaking would be noticed at the end of November based on something that had been stated on the ECMC's website. And so even though I had been checking, with some frequency, the rulemaking page, I only saw the notice of rulemaking and on the deadline to apply for party status on October 16th. So even though this was something that I was aware of was coming, I knew roughly when it would happen, and I knew where to look, I almost missed the notification that this was happening. And I think if that can happen to me, and actually I know that that did happen to a few other organizations, if that can happen to us, I think the risk that it could happen to communities is much higher. And so, you know, if you're considering alternatives to simply increasing the timing requirements, there are other ways of going about it, such as, you know, having the operators note, you know, how many people attended the meetings. They had a community meeting. Did 2 neighbors show up out of a community of 2,000? Or I think that you have options here other than simply saying more days is better. But I think that, you know, more days is the first solution that comes to my mind.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for the panel? All right, seeing no further questions, we'll let you go. Thanks for being with us and for making the presentation to us. Commissioners, it is 12:10. It's probably time for a lunch break. It's 12:11. Let's return at 1 o'clock. It'll give us a little more than 45 minutes. Welcome back. Mr. Conroy, we'll get to you in a second. I've got a procedural issue to take care of first. Mr. Thomas, did you have anything to add before we move in?
No.
Okay. Wanted to note in a different docket, 2409-00229, that is the rulemaking around produced water that is set to take effect sometime next week. The commission received a motion for leave to file a motion for a continuance. The filing parties are API, Chevron, Noble, PDC, Civitas, Koga, Conservation Colorado, Western Colorado Alliance for Community Action, Garfield County, and the Western and Rural Local Government Coalition, Larimer County, the City of Longmont, Oxy, Weld County, and West Slope Koga. That's essentially all of the parties to the produced water rulemaking. We will take this matter up at 9 a.m. tomorrow as the commission. Generally, I rule on these as chair, but since we're all going to be together, we might as well all take a look at the motion, and I'll make sure it gets into each of the commissioners' inboxes. And Hearings Manager Thomas, if you could alert the parties that the motion will be taken up by the commission tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., that'll give everybody a chance for due process to listen in. Any questions? All right. Back to our normally scheduled business. We are back with the Class 6 rulemaking docket 241-000-246. And I believe now we are going to hear from Weld County. You're recognized, Mr. Conroy.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. Matt Conroy, Assistant Weld County Attorney. With me, I have Brett Kavanaugh, the new Director of the Weld County Oil and Gas Energy Department, who will give some brief remarks, and then I'll also be available to answer any questions. I believe I saw Brett on.
Are we waiting on Mr. Kavanaugh? Oh, there we go. Hello, Mr. Kavanaugh. I think this is the first time we've met with you. Do you want to do a quick introduction to the commission? And
yes,
congratulations.
Appreciate everyone's time today, all the commissioners. So yeah, as Matt said, I'm the new commissioner or the new director here for Weld County for the Oil and Gas Energy Department. So got a long background in oil and gas here in Colorado and across the Rockies and from coast to coast. So I look forward to working with each and every one of you guys over the next years. And I do appreciate your time today and listening to us.
Absolutely. No, we're thrilled to meet you. We knew that you were going to be appointed. We look forward to establishing a good working relationship with you and your team as we've done in the past. And so Yeah, appreciate all that. We will now start your time if you want to go ahead and start your presentation.
No, we appreciate that. As you guys are all aware, as of November 20th draft, that we really have no major issues with the rules as they were drafted. We do appreciate the rules allowing the co-locating of the Class 6 wells with the industry sources to produce the CO2 if it makes sense and reduces impacts. We also appreciate the removal of the additional half-mile buffer around the geological sequestration area for best management practices, unless added on a case-by-case basis by the director. This seems reasonably protective while still allowing for flexibility as we get more facts on the ground on how these projects are developing in coordination with other wells and other uses. As a general matter, we aren't sure really there is any need for the ECMC regulations to be more stringent to the EPA's regulations. I believe everyone's still going for primacy here. So, as Weld County, we really don't feel that they should be any more stringent than the EPA's. We do want to thank all the commissioners for all their work on this issue in the matter. I know that there's a lot of people that have been speaking with you today, and you have a lot to take in regards to all their comments. And I do appreciate all their time because collectively you got a lot of work to do here. Like I said, we want to thank you guys for your work on these issues, and we really do look forward to working together within our respective authorities moving forward. And that's all I have. Matt, do you have anything additional?
No, I have nothing else and just happy to answer any questions.
Yep, I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. Commissioners, the panel is open for questions. All right. Again, thanks. Appreciate your participation. We will allow you to move on, and we will now call up the Southern Ute Indian Tribe for a presentation. Good afternoon, Mr. Ships.
Chairman Robbins, good afternoon to you and members of the commission. It's always a pleasure to appear in front of you. I'm here today representing the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. You may need to bear with me for a second. We're making sure that logistically we can proceed effectively for you. So just for a second, I don't know whether Elizabeth Takeuchi is participating. She may not be, but she's also been assisting me in this process. And also Kate Potemkin, who is going to be assisting with posting exhibits for our presentation. I don't see that she is.
I am here.
Oh, good. All right. Very good then. With that, then, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, if I can proceed.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. I would like to, among other things, echo the compliments that have been provided to the staff and also to the commission. This is a complicated rulemaking. I thought that the presentations for Mike Rigby and Lauren Merson and Mark Seeley were excellent earlier today, but it's reflective of the hard work that they have devoted to this challenging project for some time. We are not, on behalf of the tribe, as focused perhaps on some of the substantive issues that have been brought before you as we are on jurisdictional matters. And we appreciate the commission's historic as well as its current paying attention to the jurisdictional issues that have been raised by the tribe. Many of, or at least several of the issues that we raised in our pre-hearing or our pre-hearing statement specifically about jurisdiction were resolved by the commission and by, I think, with the assistance of the Attorney General staff. And so I think our comments are going to be largely limited to pre-application and post-application consultation issues related to the tribe. Before proceeding to that, though, I did want to highlight, with respect to the jurisdictional issues, make reference to HB 24-1346 as it amended section 3460-105-4A, which is the provision that addresses the commission's powers as they relate to the Southern Ute Indian Reservation and to the Southern Ute Indian tribe. And in that regard, the legislation specifically exempted both the tribe as well as tribally controlled affiliates operating within the boundaries of the reservation from the jurisdiction of the commission. That same piece of legislation, HB 1346, in section 11, addressed the presumption of pore space ownership. And again, I think reflective of the mutual respect that the state has for the tribe and the tribe for the state, that legislation does not affect, which had created this presumption of pore space ownership among surface owners. That legislation does not affect ownership of pore space within the exterior boundaries of the reservation. So, Kate, if you could pull up exhibit 6, I would appreciate it, please. I don't. And in talking about the reservation, and I think the commissioners, you have probably seen this before, and obviously it was presented as an exhibit in our most recent pre-hearing testimony. This exhibit 6 is a copy of Public Law 98-290, which was adopted by Congress in 1984 and confirms the exterior boundaries of the reservation. I bring it up really just to reflect on section 3. It may be difficult to see. We may need to expand that if you could. Thank you. And you could scroll down to section 3, that would be helpful as well. And that just to refresh the commissioners, that section 3 is actually the legal description of the exterior boundaries of the Southern Reservation as recognized by Congress. And I'm not going to pull them up unless the commissioners have questions about them, but we have also attached to our pre-hearing testimony exhibits 1, 2, and 3. And Kate, you don't need to pull them up, but those particular exhibits are maps. The first map shows the exterior boundaries that are reflected in this legal description. Exhibit 2 ends up showing ownership of surface lands within this described area. And exhibit 3 shows ownership of minerals within that described area, all of which I think is intended to point out that ownership of interests in lands within the Southern Ute Indian Reservation are checkerboarded. It creates complex jurisdictional issues, and as it relates certainly to the tribe acting within the reservation, the acting assumption by the parties is that the tribe has the authority to do so free from state regulation. But by the same token, it complicates matters when we're talking about non-Indians operating on the reservation, on whose lands are they operating, and those exhibits are intended to, number one, show the exterior boundaries of the reservation, and number two, show the complexities of ownership. And that ownership ends up also potentially affecting jurisdiction, particularly when it relates to non-Indians. If you could, Kate, shift for a second and move to Appendix A from the latest version of the staff's rules, page 8. And scroll down, please, to the Series 200. This is, for members of the commission, this is the latest version of the staff's definition of scope with regard to the Indian tribes, and specifically as the Southern Ute Indian tribe. And the way the staff has approached this is somewhat different from the way we had requested that the staff approach this issue in our pre-hearing testimony, or I beg your pardon, not in our pre-hearing testimony, in our pre-hearing statement. But I will say that after we reviewed what the staff had done carefully and compared it to what we had suggested in our pre-hearing statement, we think that we have gotten to the same place using somewhat all different means. And with that in mind, we believe that the staff's proposal eliminates the position or the need to take into consideration the positions that were reflected in the tribe's pre-hearing statement, specifically the statement of relief that was requested, that was founded in pages 9, 10, 11, and 12, and parts A, B, C, and D of what the tribe had submitted initially with regard to its pre-hearing statement, which leaves us not so much having to wrestle about jurisdiction as to relate to, but rather to focus on remaining issues about consultation. So, Kate, if you could pull up our pre-filed testimony, page 3, please. This is the testimony that we most recently have submitted to the commission. And you can see this is taking into consideration the resolution of what the staff did on our other jurisdictional questions. We would note that there are really 3 issues here. The first one relates to what we think is a Scrivener's error, quite frankly, in the draft rules. If you look at draft rule 1406A1, it refers to an ECM rule 301G in describing certain pre-application meetings that a geologic storage operator must conduct prior to submitting his plan or application. And we just think that there is no rule 301G either in the existing commission rules or in the proposed rules. At least we weren't able to find one. So we think that that's something that just needs to be fixed from a Scrivener standpoint. The effect of that may be of interest to the other parties, but it is something I think that needs to be fixed. The second issue goes to the redrafting of Rule 1406A2. And this is what happens with respect to the pre-application consultation requirements in addressing either the Southern Ute Indian tribe or the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. And we think that there does need to be revision in that regard. And I will get to that. And then the second one, or the third item, addresses specifically an area of consultation which we have introduced in our pre-hearing statement and in our testimony, and that relates to a special area known as the Bruneau area in western Colorado, and that specific area is land that involves a cession by the Ute tribes in 1874, on which both tribes continue to have hunting and fishing rights. And if we're talking about consultation, not necessarily jurisdiction, but consultation for operators who may be concerned about adversely affecting tribal interests, we think that the clarity is actually furthered by specifically making a reference to the Brno area that is something that can be posted by ECMC, so that either in the pre-application process or in the post-plan and notice area, if in fact that property is going to be within the Brno area, operators have knowledge that they need to notify the tribe. So if we could if I could, just for a second. For me, the easiest way to do this, I suppose, is to pull up our revised Exhibit 4. And in our revised Exhibit 4, this we had in our pre-hearing statement, we had originally included an Exhibit 4 that had recommended changes in the draft rules. Our revised Exhibit 4 takes into account the changes that have already been recommended by the staff, which we very much appreciate. But this new revised Exhibit 4, which we filed with our pre-hearing testimony, shows the proposed definition of the Brno area that we'd like to have included in the definition sections of Series 100. It specifically makes reference, it defines that, and then it makes reference to the depiction of that exhibit to that area as reflected in Exhibit A to the Memorandum of Understanding between the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and the state of Colorado concerning wildlife management enforcement in the Brno area, which was effective September 15th, 2008. That particular MOU currently exists. It's an active memorandum of understanding between the state of Colorado and the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. There's also a similar MOU with the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, but Exhibit A to that memorandum, and if you could, Kate, I didn't give you a pre-warning on this, but if you could jump to Exhibit 5, please. This is that memorandum of understanding. And if you could scroll down to the Exhibit A to this MOU, it actually has a map showing where the Brno area is located. That's the Brno area. It includes a large area of property, ranging from Ridgeway, including area around Ouray, Telluride, Silverton, Cortez, Mancos. You can tell it's a big square area that is located in western Colorado. And our recommendation is that the Brno area be a defined term, and that memorandum of understanding that we submitted as our Exhibit 5 be kept on file by the ECMC. And if you're talking about an operator wanting to know how should I be consulting with tribes, in addition to being excluded from having to submit an application within either reservation, this would show areas that are outside of those reservations where consultation, I think, is likely to be something that the tribe would like to have. It's an area where the tribe continues to have legal rights with regard to hunting and fishing and gathering. And potentially this is an area where carbon sequestration may affect wildlife corridors. And it gives the tribe at least an opportunity to be contacted and submit comments with respect to what's being proposed by the operator. If you could jump back then please, Kate, to our revised Exhibit 4. Yes. And looking scrolling down, if you could, to the other proposed changes that we have. Again, these deal with notice requirements. And if you could first move up to the bottom half of the prior page, please, Kate. Right there. Right now, this is talking about the pre-application process. We do have differences in the description that's been proposed by the staff with regard to the pre-application process for the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. And this is our proposed change to that language, which we think is more consistent with the statutory exemptions provided in the state legislation. But this essentially would require pre-application consultation if the geologic storage area includes lands located within the exterior boundaries of the Southern Ute Indian Reservation or the Ute Mountain Ute Reservation, or, and then if you could jump to the next page, the geologic storage area of review proposed by the geologic storage operator includes lands located within the Bruneau area. And note that we're talking about the geologic storage area of review. That doesn't necessarily mean that the proposed facility is actually located. I think this is kind of the potential impact, if you will, of that. So you could be talking about a carbon sequestration well that would be located outside the boundaries of the reservation. But if the geologic storage area of review would have either an impact on lands within the reservation or would impact area in the Bruneau area, that's what we're requesting be considered by the commission in adopting its pre-application notice requirements. And similarly, we've made a similar request with regard to after the plan has gotten to the point where it's ready to be, the application has been made or it's under consideration. After the pre-application consultation, we've proposed the same standard. I don't know that I could readily pull it up, but I think it'll be easy for both for the staff and for the commission to compare what we've proposed with regard to what the staff proposal is on its Appendix A with regard to both of those sections. So with that in mind, I think that that concludes the points that we wanted to address. I'm sure then in my ramblings, I've probably provided some points of confusion or points where you need to, you may have some requests for clarification. So whatever I can do in that regard, I'm available.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Ships. I'd like to recognize AAG Mercer if she could come to the table. AAG Mercer, on the first point that was made, that 301G, can you speak to that? I thought it was in there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to clear that up. So the 301G is a new rule that the commission passed in the cumulative impacts rulemaking in October. And it won't be effective until December 15th. So it is a passed and promulgated rule, but it's not effective yet. And if you go on the commission webpage under regulation, rulemaking, I think recent rulemakings, you can find those final Class 6 rules and you'd find it there.
Well, that certainly explains it. Thank you for the clarification. It wasn't posted on existing rules because it's not in effect yet. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Mr. Ships, just a question on the Bruneau area. You know, the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, I think, has, as you're aware, we've got a great relationship and recognized tribal jurisdiction, and I think all that's dialed in pretty good. The Bruneau area issue does appear to be somewhat new to this commissioner, at least. And I guess my initial question is, are you asking that if we were to potentially permit one of these in that area, that it's just a notice before a potential consultation with the tribe? Is that the ask?
The ask is twofold because you've got two different time periods. The first is prior to an application being submitted. If in fact that application is going to include an area within the Brno session area, we request that the tribe have an opportunity for consultation from the proposed operator, which at least gives the tribe a chance to look to see, is this going to adversely affect hunting and fishing rights or gathering rights within that area. And secondly, the second time period is after that pre-application process is completed and farther down that time period where a plan is actually, I believe, been submitted to the commission. Again, if it affects those areas, we're asking for consultation. It's not a question of governance. It's a question of an opportunity for the tribe to determine whether or not it feels its hunting or its treaty rights with regard to hunting and fishing are going to be adversely affected.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it. Other commissioners with questions? All right, well, I'm not seeing further questions at this time. We'll take all these points under consideration. Really appreciate the tribes working with us. Glad that you have been able to be a party to this, and we will, I suppose, move on to our next presenter. Thank you again, Mr. Ships.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay. I believe next is Wyoming Carbon Innovation Network.
There we go. Good afternoon, commissioners. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, we can. Good afternoon, Ms. Larson.
Thank you. Good afternoon again. My name is Mimi Larson with the law firm Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, appearing on behalf of the Wyoming Carbon Initiative Network. As this is the first time that the network has appeared before the commission, I would like to take a minute.
Listen to the rest of the day.
Thank you. I would like to take.
You may want to unvisualize. You're still on the screen. Hold on just a second, Ms. Larson. There we go. Okay. If you want to start over, whatever you need to do, go ahead.
No worries. Thank you. As this is the first time that the network has appeared before the commission, I'd like to take a minute to provide some background on the organization. Established in 2023, the network is a voluntary association of private sector industries engaged in all aspects of carbon management in the state of Wyoming. The network includes industry members from across the state, and for purposes of this rulemaking, the Wyoming Energy Authority and the Wyoming-Nebraska Pore Space Owners Association have joined. The Wyoming Energy Authority advocates, facilitates, and advances Wyoming's energy economy. The Wyoming-Nebraska Pore Space Owners Association represents more than 350 private landowners owning over 200,000 acres of pore space in Wyoming and advocates on behalf of pore space owners for the development of laws and regulations to responsibly use pore space. As regional, national, and global energy demand is forecasted to grow alongside technology demands and global population growth, it is necessary to ensure carbon sequestration projects have a reasonably regulatory pathway to success. The network believes such projects will not only support carbon management strategies, but also provide significant value to local landowners and surrounding communities. Additionally, projects will afford the region an opportunity for significant investment, as a number of private sector interests are seeking the carbon management tools and infrastructure that are required to justify those investments. With all of this in mind, the network supports and recognizes the importance of UIC wells for the geologic sequestration of CO2, and its participation in this rulemaking is to support the adoption of rules that facilitate regional and multi-jurisdictional CO2 geologic sequestration projects. To that end, the network renews the following requests be considered by the Commission when adopting these rules. First, to the extent feasible, The Commission should ensure that the rules it adopts in this rulemaking are consistent and aligned with EPA's current Class 6 regulatory program. Clear and consistent regulatory approaches across state jurisdictions will allow for more and better regional CCUS projects. And second, the network encourages the Commission to explore with its neighboring states, including Wyoming, the opportunities that exist for states to share notice of geologic sequestration projects that may be within close proximity to another state's border, and what opportunities may exist for sharing information on best available practices. The network thanks staff and the Commission for this opportunity to participate in this rulemaking and to provide these comments. I'm available for any questions that commissioners may have.
Thank you, Ms. Larson, for the presentation. Commissioners, are there questions? Well, it does not appear we have questions. So thank you very much. Appreciate the Wyoming Carbon Innovation Network being with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners.
Next, we'll move to a presentation by Koga. And I think that may be you.
That would be me as well. Give me a
moment. Are you ready, or do you want a break?
If I could have a minute, that would be great, just to pull up a different screen.
Yeah, okay. We'll give you whatever time you need.
Great. Give me a moment. Thank you.
Commissioners, just a heads up, we only have 2 more parties that are available today for presentation, and there's not a ton of time there. So just giving you a heads up, you're going to have part of your afternoon back.
And Hearings Manager Thomas, I would like to share my screen. Oh, there we are. You think I know how to do this by now? And I don't believe it will be in presentation mode, but if, whoops, that's not right. Well, are you seeing by chance my presentation?
I'm seeing a presentation that says Koga Class 5 rulemaking December 2nd.
That would be the one. Let me get this in presentation mode. Okay, there we go. And one more moment. Okay. Okay, I think I'm actually ready now. Sorry for the delay.
Okay,
all right.
It's not in presentation mode, but
Oh,
that's
it's still
okay.
not?
We just
Oh,
FYI.
that's strange. Okay. And it's still not in presentation mode?
Mm-mm.
Okay, give me one moment and I think I can figure this out. It's still not, is it?
It's not. I mean, as long as you don't have notes that you don't want us to see.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. So sorry about that. Okay. Then I will begin. Good afternoon again, Commissioners. My name is Mimi Larson. I'm presenting on behalf of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, KOGA. KOGA thanks staff for their hard work on these rules, and KOGA thanks staff for including in the November 20th revised draft rules KOGA's requested edit to the definition of geologic storage facility. However, in addition to the revision to the definition of geologic storage facility, KOGA seeks Commission support for minor revisions to the definitions of carbon dioxide flowline and injection carbon dioxide. We believe these revisions are necessary to ensure that CO2 production operations are not considered CO2 injection storage operations and thus subject to the Class 6 rules. KOGA asks the Commission to consider and make the following changes identified here. So the first, which hopefully you can see, are proposed revisions to the definition of carbon dioxide flow line. COGA is seeking to add to this definition the word injection in front of carbon dioxide flow line to again specify that the flow lines that would be subject to regulation under the 1400 rule series are those flow lines that are carrying CO2 for purposes of being injected into a well, not CO2 that would be passing through a flow line for purposes of not to be injected into a UIC well. Second, we are seeking to add to the definition of injection carbon dioxide the phrase that you see here in blue that would specify that it is carbon dioxide that is for the injection into a Class 6 UIC well. Again, with the intent, just to be perfectly clear, that any carbon dioxide that is regulated under these 1400 series rules are specific to CO2 that's being injected into a Class 6 UIC well. Finally, and this is a new request, we did not propose this in any of our filings to date, but we would also seek, if it's feasible, to have included in the SBP a statement that, again, would specify that the rules that are being adopted by the Commission apply only to the sequestration of CO2 and not to the production of CO2. So, Commissioners, that does end my presentation. And if I can get back to you, I will stop sharing my screen.
Excuse me. Okay, the witness is available for questions from commissioners. Commissioner Oath?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Ms. Larson, thank you. Just, can you help me understand the practical kind of impact of that last request and clarification that it applies only to the sequestration of CO2 and not, you said, the production of CO2?
Correct. Yes. Thank you, Commissioner. So there are operators within Colorado that produce CO2 for use in operations, for instance, enhanced oil recovery operations. That CO2 could be used in Colorado. It could be transported out of state for use in other states and jurisdictions. So rather, the reason for the request for the SBP language and for the revisions to these definitions is to ensure that those activities that are not related to the injection and sequestration of CO2 would not be subject to these 1400 series rules.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions for the witness? Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Just a further question on that, and I understand the concept that you're trying to do, but can you define production for me? I mean, would that include the concept of pulling previously stored CO2 in a Class 2 injection well out and transporting it for future enhanced oil recovery or other likes, or would it be original production of that CO2?
This would be original production.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions? All right, I'm not seeing further questions. We want to thank you for the presentation on behalf of COGA, Ms. Larson.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Let's take 5 and return at 1:48. And while we're doing that, if we could get the next applicant up, that's GCC Pueblo. And then, as I mentioned to commissioners earlier, following that, we'll take Oxy, and then that is all of the witnesses that are able to testify today. So we'll be breaking a little bit earlier than normal. All right, see you in 5. All right, welcome back to the Class 6 rulemaking at the Energy and Carbon Management Commission. We now will hear a presentation from GCC Pueblo.
All right. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So I'll go ahead and get started. Let me just share my screen.
see this? Can you
Yes.
see this?
Yeah, we can see it now. It's not in presentation mode, but again, not a big problem as long as we can see everything.
Okay, I will keep it as such because it is easier for me to change slides between it. So I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Peter Omasta. I am the Climate Action Manager for GCC. I'm responsible for helping GCC establish our sustainability strategy, roadmap, and for managing projects related to carbon capture. To start, I want to thank the Commission for allowing us the opportunity to speak today and also provide a quick note of appreciation for accommodating my request to speak earlier to accommodate some other business travel. So the reason I'm sitting here today is to provide the perspective of an industrial manufacturer who is working to decarbonize our operations. GCC is a cement manufacturer. Our U.S. division headquarters is located in Denver, and we have a plant that operates in Pueblo, Colorado. As a company, GCC recognizes the importance of reducing our emissions, and we have voluntarily committed to the Science-Based Targeted Initiative goal to reduce our emissions below a 2 degrees Celsius warming scenario established by the Paris Climate Accord. As a company, we have also signed on to industry roadmaps put forth by the Portland Cement Association and the Global Cement and Concrete Association for decarbonization. So on the first slide is a graph published by the Global Cement and Concrete Association for Industrial Decarbonization. And while I won't go into detail on all of the topics on the slide, I do want to point out that in purple, it is the largest and most important level for industrial decarbonization of this industry, which is carbon capture. Topics like electrification, fuel switching, energy efficiency, and replacement materials are all important. And I will speak to what GCC has done on those topics momentarily, but I want to point out that due to high process emissions, it is impossible for the Pueblo cement plant or any cement plant across the world to decarbonize without carbon capture. At the GCC Pueblo plant in 2015, our emissions intensity for kilograms of CO2 per ton of cement produced was about 775. And in 2024, we are on track to have it be below 650 kilograms of CO2 per ton of cement. So that's a reduction in over 120 kilograms of CO2 per ton of cement, and that would be the equivalent of taking over 16,000 passenger vehicles off of the road every year. And we've done that by having one of 10 national EPA Energy Star certifications on cement plant, introducing Portland limestone cement, and improving our operational efficiency. And yet, despite these successes, as a company, we still recognize we have a long way to go to comply with the upcoming or the current GEM rules, as well as meeting our own voluntary commitments. Even with the futuristic next generation zero carbon fuels like hydrogen or a 100% solar powered kiln, GCC would still have more than 50% of our emissions. And the reason for this is because of the calcination process that takes place in making cement. And so if I can take everybody back to a quick high school chemistry class, I'll explain how cement is made on the next slide and why carbon capture is important to us. So after the limestone is quarried, we take calcium, which is calcium carbonate. That calcium carbonate is heated to between 1400 and 1500 degrees Celsius to calcine the limestone. The resulting product which forms is the basis of cement, which is calcium oxide, or also known as quicklime, and the remaining CO2 is released. At the present time, there's no substitute to make cement at the scale that is needed to meet industrial needs. Yet, modern society necessitates the use of cement. Cement is used to stabilize the base of wind turbines that will generate clean electricity. It's used to build the roads and bridges that connect us. It's necessary for the water treatment facilities that supply clean drinking water. And it's the foundation of the houses and buildings that we all live in. And I know that this is a long preamble, but I felt it's important to provide context as to why a cement manufacturer is a party to these hearings. One more point that I just want to quickly make is around cost. Cement is a commodity, and nationally, the United States uses more cement than we produce domestically. So the country's importing cement from places like China, Turkey, and Vietnam.
As domestic manufacturers work to produce cleaner and more low carbon cements, we have price pressures from foreign entities that keep the cost of cement down. This is great for consumers as it keeps inflation down, but when discussing operational costs of adding on a carbon capture system, these costs would need to be recouped in some way. And so this brings me to my third slide, which is the cost of building a carbon capture system and why GCC is here. For GCC to build a full-scale carbon capture system, if you use the price estimates established by the U.S. Department of Energy in their commercial liftoff reports, it costs between $120 to $160 per ton of CO2 captured annually. This is an estimated price range. This includes an estimated price range of $10 to $40 for sequestration and transportation. The 45Q tax credits, which are the primary economic driver for this, are only counting for geological sequestration, not for utilization. Our understanding is that the 45Q for sequestration can only go into a Class 6 well. The Class 2 wells are used for enhanced oil recovery and utilization. So we are just focused on the sequestration part of this graph. I'll spare everyone in the room the discussions of internal rates of return, carbon price implications, and other factors that would go into the final investment decision to build a carbon capture facility on site. But to state it plainly, if the economics of building a carbon capture facility are so high that it either threatens to put the plant out of business, one of two things will happen. The project won't go forward, and all of the environmental and social benefits of capturing carbon and other criteria pollutants will be lost, or the costs will get passed on to consumers, which could result in higher prices for a product that is the second most commonly used material in the world behind water. Back to my prior point, with cement being a global commodity, if we raise prices too much, we can see local manufacturing undercut by international suppliers. So if the cost of cement is held down to where we cannot increase it to recoup carbon capture costs, and the facility is too expensive that running it puts the plant in jeopardy, the investment decision on whether or not to build a carbon capture facility is fairly clear. So the reason we are party to these hearings is that we understand the concerns of groups who claim carbon capture and storage technologies are nascent. The state of Colorado should absolutely be working to make sure that this generation of technology and solutions protects communities. Yet at the same time, if there is too stringent of regulations, too much cost associated with these wells that pushes the cost of transportation and sequestration to the higher end of that $10 to $40 range, which I mentioned earlier, you're going to see less adoption of a technology that the U.S. Department of Energy in their pathways to industrial decarbonization and the state of Colorado have identified as being necessary to reach our decarbonization goals. One final point on the transportation is from the U.S. Department of Energy's National Energy and Technology Lab, which did a study for building a carbon capture facility at the Folsom Cement Plant in Colorado. The cost of building a 54-mile pipeline spur to an existing CO2 pipeline in the state would cost over $100 million, according to this report. So that's roughly coming out to about $2 million per mile. If the siting of a CO2 injection well is only allowed in far and remote places, these project economics will likely never pencil out. Instead, what we will see happen is that as the low carbon economy gains in traction, new manufacturing will go where it's easy and economical to sequester carbon. Jobs that would otherwise go to traditional manufacturing communities will be lost, and those communities and areas will start to be importing products. Most of the cement GCC produces stays in the state of Colorado, and with a state population that is expected to grow in the coming decades, there will be need for more of our product. We want to be a part of the solution to help Colorado grow and to do it sustainably, which is why we are looking at carbon capture in the first place. So I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to me today. Despite the fact I'm not an expert on underground plume monitoring, I have no background in petroleum or subsurface engineering or any of the other more technical aspects related to CO2 injection. I have a background in ecology, finance, and corporate sustainability. My career and personal goals are in addressing global climate change and making sure that the blue-collar communities that have helped physically build this country are a part of the next low-carbon economy. That's why I work at GCC. As a company, they uphold the same values, and as a company, GCC generally supports the rulemaking. Our only concerns are related to additional processes that could increase costs and delay implementation of this needed solution. With that, I'm happy to address any questions.
Unmute. Okay, commissioners, the witness is available for questions. Well, we appreciate you being with us this afternoon, Mr. Omasta. We don't have questions.
Thank you.
All right. Now we will hear from Occidental Petroleum.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Would you like me to start?
Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, good afternoon, Commissioner, staff, council, and members of the public. My name is Jamie Jost of Jost Energy Law, and I, along with my partner, Kelsey Wazelinski, represent Oxy USA, Inc. in this Class 6 rulemaking proceeding. Oxy thanks the ECMC director and staff for the open dialogue during the early stakeholder stages of this rulemaking, and also thanks them for their hard work and efforts. The two sets of draft rules that continue to reflect the Commission's efforts to gain primacy from the EPA over Class 6 wells. Oxy has been supportive of the ECMC's attempts to obtain primacy from the EPA over Class 6 permitting and geologic storage operations, as well as supportive of the ECMC's proposed timeline to submit the appropriate application for such primacy in early 2025. Oxy provided comments on several rules, including Rule 616, requirements for wells drilled through or adjacent to a geologic storage facility, as well as Rule 1415, financial responsibility. With respect to Rule 616, Oxy appreciates the staff's modifications to reflect an operator's compliance with Rule 616, as well as the staff's inclusion in the statement of basis and purpose that provides the Commission intends that Rule 616 will allow mineral development in a safe and effective manner when in proximity to geologic storage operations or a geologic storage facility, and does not intend for this rule to prohibit the drilling of wells through or near a geologic storage facility. This was a critical clarification for operators, staff, and members of the public. With respect to Rule 1415, Oxy respectfully requests that the Commission consider revising Rule 1415 to be more consistent with EPA Rule 40 CFR Section 146.85. The statement of basis and purpose provides that the Commission adopted Rule 1415 from EPA Rule 40 CFR Section 146.85 regarding geologic storage operators' financial responsibilities. However, this is not entirely accurate. Oxy has addressed its concerns with Draft Rule 1415 since its original comment letter regarding the July 10th, 2024 Straw Dog rules and throughout this formal rulemaking process. Many positive changes have been made by staff to the Class 6 rules, which Oxy greatly appreciates for clarification and certainty. However, the November 20th, 2024 Draft Rule 1415 remains inconsistent with the Federal Financial Responsibility Regulation. The primary example of this inconsistency lies in what instruments an operator may utilize to meet its financial responsibility requirements for Class 6 wells. The federal regulation expressly allows for trust funds, surety bonds, letters of credit, insurance, self-insurance, an escrow account, and any other instrument satisfactory to the director. And that's found in 40 CFR Section 146.85 A, I, Romanet I through Romanet VII. Proposed Rule 1415A1, however, does not provide for the use of letters of credit or self-insurance and would require trust funds with government-backed securities. Oxy recognizes that the statement of basis and purpose attempts to address these missing items from the federal regulation when it provides, pursuant to Rule 1415A1, geologic storage operators must maintain financial responsibility instruments from a list of qualifying instruments, including any other instruments satisfactory to the director. Rule 1415A1F is intended to allow for discretion for the director to allow types of financial responsibility instruments not enumerated in Rule 1415A1, A through E, provided that the geologic storage operator can demonstrate that the instrument satisfies the Act and the Commission rules. Rule 415 is not intended to specifically exclude any form of financial responsibility instrument. Oxy appreciates the deference to the director in allowing various types of instruments to be utilized to satisfy its financial responsibility obligations under Rule 1415. However, Oxy respectfully requests that Rule 1415A1, the financial responsibility provision, be revised to conform with the federal regulation allowances and expressly include letters of credit, self-insurance, and trust funds not requiring government-backed securities. These inclusions are primarily requested to ensure consistency with the federal regulation and also to allow the commercial flexibility needed due to the fact that the state financial responsibility obligations for Class 6 wells require full assurance for each individual injection well instead of a comprehensive statewide or field-wide bond. To conclude, Oxy greatly appreciates the consistency with most EPA regulations in the November 20th, 2024 draft rules, as well as appreciates the ECMC's goal of obtaining primacy for Class 6 well permitting in Colorado. Oxy believes that the minor changes to Rule 1415 requested today will assist the ECMC in meeting that goal. Thank you for your time and consideration of these comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Jost, for the presentation. Just a quick follow-up to the ask on 1415. In enumerating those other potential tools, Oxy's not suggesting that the director still maintains discretion as to whether the attempted use of one of those other tools is going to be allowable or not, right? That director discretion remains a part of it.
Yes, Chair, thank you for the question. Absolutely. Oxy is not questioning any part of the process for the director's discretion and review, as well as the commission's discretion and review. We are just asking for consistency of adding those three instruments to the allowable instruments to be reviewed.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification. The witness is available for further questions. All right. I'm not seeing further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hearings Manager Thomas, could you elevate yourself? Hey there.
Your chair.
That's it for today. Is that right?
That's correct. And we have 4 parties scheduled to go tomorrow: Green Latinos, Colorado Chamber of Commerce, Carbon Storage Solutions, and Allied Local Governments in Larimer County as a combined presentation.
Okay. And looking at our list, that's a couple hours worth of testimony. It has gone, a little quicker than previous rulemakings. So what I would suggest to the parties is we'll take that direct testimony, the cases in chief in the morning. Depending upon where we are, we will move into rebuttal testimony. And then following that, we move to closing statements. The parties were allocated certain times, and they know how much time they have left, or they can ask Mr. Thomas, and that time can be used for either or both of those two categories of further testifying to us. That is rebuttal first, and we'll go in the same order, and then closing statements, and we'll go in the same order. And then following that, we would move into deliberations by commission, with the commission obviously having the chance to talk to staff again, which we sort of suggested we might do after this morning's statements from staff. So with that, I believe we are done for the day. Does any commissioner have questions, thoughts, process issues, etc.? All right, so we're going to continue this proceeding to 9 a.m. on December 3rd. Would remind commissioners to check their inbox for the motion for the continuance in the produced water. Take a look at that. We'll take that up at 9 a.m. promptly, and then we'll move back into this rulemaking. I think that's it. See you in the morning. Go Broncos.